All right, council members, we are going to call this meeting to order. I apologize for the late start. We try not to do that, but we did have legislative visits across the way, and so we had members, including myself, who were late because of that, so I apologize. We are going to move some things around just a little bit on the agenda to accommodate people's schedules. So the agenda that you have in front of you, council members, after the initial welcome and roll call, has us looking at the Equity Committee Subcommittee report and set of recommendations. Following that, we're going to bump up item number 5, which is the communications strategy, and then we'll proceed as is with the rest of the agenda. And again, that's just for timing and frankly travel for folks. So that's the plan for today. We will have us out of here no later than 2:30. I know that we have a member or two who needs to sneak out and finish a visit across the street, so please do that, but please do come back and join us and we'll just catch you up with where we are. All right, so with that, can I ask Alyssa to call the roll, please? Oh, you're up here.
Yeah, I just swapped myself.
That's okay. Coming down.
Okay,
Thank you.
no problem. Pam Curtis,
Here.
Harriet Adair,
Here.
Vicki Bishop. Here. Martha Brooks. Here. Janet Doherty Smith.
Here.
Tim Freeman, are you on the line?
I am on the line.
Great.
Thank you.
Kelly. Charles McGee.
Here.
Eva Ripito. Here. Krista Root. Present. Lynn Saxton.
Here.
Terry Tallhofer. Oh, she's
excused,
Jim should be on his way. Bobby Weber.
Here.
Kim Williams.
Present.
Dick Withnell. Marlene Yesquin. Here. Rob Saxton.
Here.
Great, thank you very much. So we have Tim on the line. I will just say that Terry was en route this morning and got a call that her father had a medical emergency. So she turned around and went the other way. So we'll miss her, but she's excused for today. And I think that Jim is on his way as well. Oh, and Khalid's on her way. So perfect. We'll have a full roster when they arrive. So thanks to everybody. We're going to just go ahead and dive right in. We have some consultants with us that have been helping our equity subcommittee work on their report, and I know they are on a time schedule. So we will do our best to honor that time schedule. And I'm going to turn this over to Marlene, who's been chairing our equity subcommittee. And as I do that, though, let me just give a huge thanks and to Marlene, to all of the members of this council who served on the equity subcommittee, and all of the folks who are either in the room or not in the room who served on the equity subcommittee. We gave them a very large task and a very small timeline. So they did an incredible amount of work. And as you can see from your material, brought back a very comprehensive report and set of recommendations. So we're going to dedicate a chunk of this morning's time to that report. So Marlene, thank you for your work, and we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. So I'm going to call Connie Morgan up to the table, and Vicki Bishop, if you want to sit over here, we can make some room so you guys can see us. So thank you, thank you everyone. I want to start off by thanking all of the council members for charging and setting up this group, because the work that we were doing, as Pam noted, is truly monumental. It's extensive. It's actually more intensive than I thought it would initially be, and then I think many of you probably thought it would be. But I truly do think that we're on the right path. We're on the right path with pursuit of the Oregon equity lens that we have, and just following up with that and making sure that we're in compliance with that. And I think that what I wanted to point out to the group while I'm, is that this was a different task that we were given. We were tasked with evaluating all of the Early Learning Council's policies and practices and implementing the Oregon Equity Lens in all practices and policies of the Early Learning Council. Very different from what, from any other work group or committee that we've established. Usually, most of the other committees that we have are very focused on a particular area, like health, hubs, providers. Well, we had to look at not only providers, hubs, health, we're looking at also underserved populations, and that continues, that definition includes children of color, children of low socioeconomic status, children with special needs. It includes a number of other things, as you'll see in our report, a number of other characteristics, as you see in our report. So this was intense. Did everything get evaluated and touched on it as we desired? No, it didn't. And so our main recommendation from this group is that we continue the work forward. I think it's established, what this group was able to establish was a platform, a good platform for us to, as to issues and barriers and areas that need addressing. You know, as a Latina woman and a child that was raised in a low income household setting, it was, you know, I never understood inequity. And always thought, you know, I'm going to push through an education so I can change policies, because policies will change people's behavior. And, you know, as naive as I was, I think this process of working on this subgroup, on this committee, has just made it more evident that policy alone cannot change practices that keep our education system, you know, defaulting and not allowing all children to be successful. So I truly believe that, you know, as much as we all know, as serving as early council members, the value of education at an early age, we also need to understand and value the equity principles behind that, that we treat, that all children have accessibility to those services and are treated, are not treated differently, because that will impact their educational success. So, for example, you know, it's not enough to just say we're going to graduate all of our kids in Oregon are going to graduate by 2025. We need to put more specific policies and practices and make sure that there are specific goals tied to that ultimate goal, so that individuals have something that they can shoot for, and also demonstrate that they're moving in that direction of change. So I wanted to just give you some current figures on the population that we're addressing. While we're not solely focusing on children of color, that was the starting point for the Oregon Equity Lens, was focusing on children of color as the starting point of race, focusing on race. And so children nationwide right now, ages 0 to 4 in the nation, 45% of our ages 0 to 4 are children of color. In the state of Oregon, it's approximately 30%, and that's 0 to 5 age group are children of color. And so it's a large amount of children that are impacted, and where we're seeing the discrepancies are in our graduation rates. We're not seeing children of color graduate if we're just looking at color. But again, there's all sorts of other factors that we're looking at as well, socioeconomic factors that we didn't even get to touch. I mean, we talked about it in this group, but you will not be effective if we won't be effective if we group all of these groups together, these children together. Children of color and their issues are very different from children with language needs, or very different from children living in poverty. So our recommendation is that the next implementation group that is established will continue to elaborate on those specific areas and do some more specific work in finding the right tools for those specific areas of need. So I also wanted to, instead of going through the entire report today with you, I know we gave that report to you prior to the committee. I hope that you all had some time to look at it and evaluate, and I hope that you'll support it, because I think that the work of the committee members was phenomenal. It was and I wanted you to get a sense, a taste of what we went through, because there are some hard issues that arise out of this, and sometimes people need to just state their experiences and talk, and that's okay. But so today what we have is we're going to spend most of the time doing an activity. We have we hired a national equity specialist, Carmen Morgan, who's here today, and she helped us through this process of our final recommendation to you, and hopefully she'll continue helping us as we continue to establish an implementation system that addresses equity. But she's going to run through she's going to facilitate a discussion around diversity and inclusion. Again, to give you a sense of what we did. We also have Sarita Amaya, who's going to give you a little summary of our report towards the end. And I want to compliment and thank Megan Irwin for the work that she's done and the foresight that she had in hiring and establishing an equity director for the Early Learning Council and the Oregon Department of Education. I believe they kind of share her, but I want to caution the Early Learning Council in that, as we found out through this process, through the work of the subcommittee, one person may not be enough to address all of the early learning services, all of the early learning policies. And, I think that's the mistake that nationwide we've made with ineffective policies and programs, is that we hire one individual and expect that one individual to take care of the entire state of Oregon's equity problems. That's thousands and thousands of children. And so I hope that we don't continue to make that mistake. I signed on for this task primarily because I want to make sure that we're effective. And as you all know, in the work that you do, we're impacting children's lives. And this is the one shot for many of our children. So hopefully, through Megan's leadership, it's clear to me that she will be monitoring that situation, and if the need arises, we'll be able to determine whether more staff is needed. But I'd hope that the council also stays on, keeps that in mind as the process continues, and just monitors that as well to make sure that we're not overloading this one position so that she's just not effective. She's a wonderful individual, and we've made a great hire in Sarita. And this report would not be, we wouldn't be here without her today. So I appreciate her skills and her talent. We also have, we'll also have time for you to ask questions and get some answers if you have some. And we have Diana Bender on the phone. Is she? She was our other consultant that we hired through the Build Initiative. And she's helped us tremendously as well through this process. So she will also join in on providing answers to any questions that you may have. But I also wanted to introduce Vicki Bishop, who was part of the council, but also part of our work group, our subcommittee, and very instrumental in asking questions and getting into the real, and getting us to ask hard questions about the work that we're doing. And she will be available also to answer any of your questions. So right now I'd like to introduce Carmen Morgan and have her take us through the activity of diversity and inclusion. I'm not doing Carmen any favors in summarizing her resume. She's got a long list of wonderful achievements and skills, but I'm just going to try to focus on a couple of the things that she's doing at this time. She's spent in the last 6 years, she served on the diversity and inclusion consultant. She served as a diversity and inclusion consultant for the Southern Oregon Shakespeare Festival. She's also the diversity consultant for Ashland Unified School District in Southern Oregon. And she's the Director of Leadership Development and Intergroup Relations, a nationally recognized program co-sponsored by Asian Americans Advancing Justice, the Central American Resource Center, and the Martin Luther King Dispute Resolution Center. So that alone, she's got some diverse groups working together, and she's given us so many valuable resources, and I truly believe that her help will be invaluable to this process. So take it away, Carmen.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, let me just say, this is a mutual admiration little society here, because I can't say enough about working with the team here, with the staff support and some of the subcommittee members. So first, let me just say, the comprehensive way that you all are taking on this work is really impressive. I wish more organizations would, quite frankly, more civil rights organizations would take this on in such a comprehensive way. So let me just start there. Kudos to everyone, all of you, for your commitment. And Marlene's leadership on the subcommittee, she has, I don't know how she does it, but she's called me at various times of the day as if she has no schedule of her own. We've met face to face on, for a coffee. You've been really great. Your leadership's been really set the tone and the importance of this issue. And then I don't even want to look at Sarita as I say this because Sarita and Alyssa? Is Alyssa here?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I mentioned.
Thank you. I completely forgot about that. I don't know how.
In addition to, picking folks up from the airport, dropping them off at the airport, doing all kinds of things like that, she, I mentioned to her this morning that there are 3 people that I just get, every day I get a lot of emails from, and 2 of them are in this room. Sarita and Alyssa, okay? And just incredible staff. And I think that sometimes, we do this work and we don't have time to just honor the really good work, but you all should know that their work is incredible. Okay, so having said that, I do want to support a conversation with you all, and I trust that many of you have probably been a part of some version of these conversations, maybe already together, maybe not. But I'd like to talk to you about some best practices, and a lot of this is research-based. It comes out of foundations and academia in terms of when you're launching a comprehensive initiative like this, what are some things to guard against, and what are some things to do? So I thought that would be a good place for us to start. And then the other is, I wanted to leave you all with a framework that might be helpful in assessing organizational culture. And I actually wanted to, this is the interactive part of it, I wanted us to actually do some of that together. Assess some organizational culture, like maybe your culture. And then just to leave you with a couple of handouts that you all may want to come back to and talk about. Opportunities that you want to seize in order to continue this work being effective, and traps that you want to avoid that will unintentionally undermine the work. And then we're going to close out with a little spoken word. I was told that Charles, is Charles here? Charles, I've not met you. We don't know each other, correct?
Correct.
There's nothing up my sleeve. But I was told that you're the one to help out close this out with a little spoken word activity. So you, Charles, I'll be coming back to you. You and Marlene are going to close this out.
Okay.
And
Surprise to you, Charles.
yeah, no, I know. Charles, just know that your reputation precedes you. And I was told that Charles is the one that I want to talk to about this.
Okay.
Okay, it's a good thing.
I'm ready for it.
Now, I was told that I would have 70 minutes. Is that still the case? Because I know we're starting late.
That is still the case.
Okay, great. Then let me get my timer going. Wonderful. So, and again, because, a lot of the work that organizations do to change their organizational culture, communities do, it's far more than an hour. So I want to manage expectations, and just to say that we are just going to do a primer here and talk about some large concepts. Right, we've got about an hour, and I know that you all are going to seed this work in some ways to continue this conversation, hopefully amongst yourselves, and also I think the way we've been thinking about it is with the staff, and so this is just again, it's a primer. So the first thing, you all might have this packet. I think it's in your binder. Everything that we're going to talk about is contained in it. Bless you. And so the first thing that I want to do is to just, I mentioned some of the research that's out there. I want to start by talking about this, and I'm hoping that this is going to be somewhat interactive. So I'm going to put out some things, and I hope that you all will respond to it and let me know your thoughts. But the first is just on page 1 in that packet. It's at the heading is Best Practices for Diversity and Inclusion Initiatives. I see some of you looking for it. Where would it be inside their binder?
It's behind tab 1.
Behind tab 1.
And then behind the second green
Oh, there you go.
divider.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Very
tab
last
1,
section.
second green divider.
Okay. Behind tab 1, the second green divider. Great. Okay. And so it's so best practices for diversity and inclusion initiatives. And you know, I'm happy to I think that you all as you hear me talking about these, you can think about how the Oregon Department of Education, how the Early Learning Council, how you all stack up with this. And there's some really, I think it's very positive, because a lot of what's on here in terms of a framework that is successful, I think you all are doing. So the first, you know, it's probably self-evident, is a lot of organizations, believe it or not, that I work with and talk to, they come out of the gate and right away they want to start with action, implementation. We're ready to do some programming. And one of the first things I ask them is, so talk to me about your values around issues of equity. Talk to me about your values, and you know, do you have a value statement? Do you have any kind of strategic thinking or planning? No, but we want to start doing some program work. So one of the things that's a guidepost is to really be clear about your organizational values, and not only be clear about them, how about document them? So that if the person who's espousing those values leave, the organization still says we're committed to this. So one of the first things to do is to just really be clear about where the values are, what they are. Leadership commitment and support is really essential. Well, I think essential might be strong. It's really, really helpful, but I've seen organizations do a lot, even when the board of directors or some people in senior leadership positions have been barriers on a good day, hostile on a bad day. The organization is bigger than any one person. And so there's still a lot you can do, even if your leadership is indifferent or, quite frankly, even hostile. But it's helpful to have leadership support. The other is clarity on how these values are connected to your mission. And keep tying it back to that intentionally. One of the things that I do often is I just remind the organization about who they say they want to be. I'm not telling you to do anything you don't want to do. The community's not telling you to do anything you don't. You all have said, you've lifted this up as a value, and you've said that this is important to you. So some of it is just reminding folks about the values that they've espoused. And the other thing I already mentioned is to document it. Having these values are great. Folks, you know, look, I'm all for talk story and the spoken word, but you're going to want to document this, because when key leadership leaves, or those folks who have really been doing that work leave, then you don't have anything that's left behind. And then the other is, and this is quite challenging for a lot of organizations, you all are grappling with this as well, is how do you assess and clarify goals? How are you going to measure your effectiveness? So it is important to conduct appropriate assessments that track demographics, and assessments that track attitudinal shifts. Qualitative and quantitative organizational assessment tools are really important. It's really helpful. I'm laughing because I'm working with an organization now for over 7 years, and it's really funny over time how you forget who you were. And so, you know, I might be sitting around a meeting, and, you know, they've got all these internal structures. They've got a diversity and inclusion planning council. They've got resource groups, affinity groups, and they, you know, come to these meetings and they say, well, you know, we've always been doing such and so. No, you haven't always been doing such and so. So it's helpful to have benchmarks, track where you are now, so that you can see over time your progress. And then I work with organizations who say, well, we've been doing this for so long and we just haven't been making any progress. Actually, you have been. You just haven't been tracking it. So assessing and clarifying goals is really important. Having some systems in place where you can know what your baseline is, so that over time you can celebrate your successes, because it does take a lot of time. And the other thing, you all are doing this, have a plan. Sometimes a short-term, this is what we've got to do in the next 6 months plan, and then maybe a long-term, broader strategic plan. And a couple of foundations, they've been doing a lot of research around the efficacy and the value of strategic plans. You all probably know some of this, but they don't need to be so long, because things are happening in the real time, in the moment. And we've just learned, particularly a lot of nonprofit organizations have really took some hits when we had the economic downturn, and those strategic plans were not helpful, and they're still on the shelf. What can you do and commit to in the next 12 months, 18 months, 2 years? And keep it moving, keep it being organic. So I would invite you to do the same with your diversity and inclusion and equity work as well. Have plans that are nimble, that can adjust and be revised based on the emerging needs. And then the other, and again, so this is a lot of research. This is all a composite of research that a lot of foundations have done. This is what they've said, these are some best practices. The other piece beyond a plan is, and this is the area that I see many organizations getting stuck. When I work with folks who say, we just don't know what's going wrong. I mean, we've been committed to this for a long time, and we're just not making any movement here. And usually, it comes down to this area, which is they're clear about their values, their missions, they've been articulated, they've been meeting about it, but they haven't created the organizational systems and structures to actually carry out the work. So they still have the same organizational structure to try to do this new thing. And it oftentimes doesn't work. Or they still have the same policy to do outreach, recruitment, and hiring, although they want to do diversity recruitment and they want to do active recruitment, and they've got the same policies in place. I see a hand here. Yeah.
I would just ask you, how often do you find that that's about resource allocation, that people like the idea of talking about things, but when it comes to actually allocating resources in a different way, they don't ever get there?
I think a lot of...
That would be a lot of... That always seems to me like the hardest thing to get people to do is to actually change their resource allocation. Talking about it, having plans, all that stuff's great. Changing how resources get allocated, really hard.
Absolutely, I would agree. I think the budget is a part of it, that resource, and also the human resource. That oftentimes the folks involved it's not a part of their job description. It doesn't get factored into their work plans. You're absolutely right. I think that's a pretty significant part of it. And I think another part of it, believe it or not, sometimes more than not having the resources, because some of these organizations have $1 million budgets. They just don't know. They don't know how to create new systems, policies, and protocols. But I think those two work together. Resource allocation in terms of the financial and human resources, and also just the lack of capacity, the lack of staff capacity and internal capacity to do it. Absolutely. Yeah.
So when you think about, so for instance, how many of the hub directors are people of color? One. So when you think about sort of like structures and systems and sort of how we start to question stuff like resource allocation, one of the things that the committee talked about early on when I was there was sort of having this goal. So I think it was like 50% of all funding would target children of color, right? Talk about sort of, is there research that says that that's bad? Is there research that says that that's good? Like in a system like this, what are the benefits? What are the pros and cons of that?
Is having funds dedicated to target underrepresented constituents problematic? Mm-hmm. I wouldn't say it is. And I'm taking it out of the realm of just children of color. Historically underrepresented groups, period. There's a whole lot of catch-up that needs to happen. So I think part of it definitely is back to the issue of resource allocation. And then I think the other part of it is, how are those funds going to be used? How are they going to be used? What is the quality of the programming? And that gets back to what some of this conversation that we're going to have together, because, I think, to me, one of the hardest things to do is to have well-intentioned people around the table really committed to this, and to even have funds really committed to this, but we keep cranking out programming and policies that are inherently racist. And that is because the people around the table oftentimes don't have the level of awareness to see some of their own stuff. You know, you don't know what you don't know. And so one of the biggest daunting challenges continues to be how to interrupt the very thing that you're working to fix as you work to fix it. You know what I'm saying? So here we are, this committee, you all are gonna be charged with really trying to operationalize a commitment to the early learning community around equity. And what possible barriers exist in this room? Where might there be some opportunities to reveal inherent racist practices, beliefs? That is the hardest thing to get at. And that's why I want us to do a little bit of organizational, cultural assessment with you all. And I'll say this because, you know, I get to come here, say this, and leave. I will say this: if you're not willing to do that work, hand this off to somebody else. If you think that you can have a dispassionate conversation about these issues, and it's somebody else's, it's not mine, I don't have any stake in issues of equity, youth of color don't, racism doesn't, then then what a setup. What a setup. You've got to be all in, folks, and be really clear about what is your own identity and social location as you have these conversations, move through these discussions. How big is your own footprint? And where do you have privilege? And if you think that that doesn't have an impact on the programs that you crank out and the policies, the way you even frame the problem, then I want to really push back real hard on that and say it does. And if you all are not going to invest the time and energy to be really self-reflective and be as uncomfortable as you're willing to be in the service of these young folks, then step back, hand this off to somebody else to do it. Okay.
So I want to come back to resource allocation one more time. You said something-
Please do.
You said something that I thought was important, and I wanted to emphasize it. And it's the idea of resource allocation absent the very kinds of discussions and discomfort that you just talked about.
Yeah.
Or resource allocation that is predicated based on an effort to support underrepresented or children who in the past have been disadvantaged by resource allocation through a lens of intended equitable distribution that still has inherent problems with it,
Yeah.
whatever you want to call about it,
Yeah.
is maybe worse, right? That still has institutional racism buried within the resource allocation.
Absolutely.
Actually,
Yeah.
it's worse because you declare that those resources are for that purpose and you don't see movement.
Absolutely.
As opposed to actually making the important resource allocation in a way that removes those issues and directs it to the place where you're trying to make the difference.
Yeah.
And so you said that, but you said it really fast, and I just wanted to put it in the room
Yeah.
for a second, because that's
Yeah.
a hard piece of work to do.
Yeah.
And until we're intentional about it and say, not only are we going to allocate resources in a way that's intended to get at disparate treatment and disparate outcomes, but we're going to do it in a way that's culturally relevant and effective.
Yeah.
Then we're really getting there. But until we get to the bottom of that, we're not really making the difference. And in fact, there's the opportunity that we may make allocation and then not be able to figure out why we're not having the impact that we're looking for.
Absolutely. that is the.
I challenge us to do that, and it's
Absolutely.
going to be hard to do.
That's at the core of it. Yeah. I'm sorry. Are you Dick? I see. I thought you were Dick. Okay.
Oh, boy.
No, I thought you were Dick. So you're.
Carl's dad.
He
okay.
is. He is.
I would use car sales.
I thought, yeah,
Dick will sell you a car real soon.
I just realized I was attributing your name to this gentleman here, so
good.
I don't know your name.
Rob.
Good.
Bob?
Rob.
Rob, thank you, Rob.
It's the only
Thank
time
you.
that Rob's been elevated in a meeting
I
like
was elevated. I was.
up there almost, right?
I was.
Yeah. Let's see, what was I gonna say?
Organization.
I think what Rob just said, I think comes
Brilliant.
to the cliche of big hat, no cattle, and it's a real problem when you talk about what we're talking about here and what you've just been talking about, and going downtown to say outside of this austerious group meeting of what we're talking about, to see the value of that. I don't think until we impregnate downtown, showing the value of what we're talking about, we're going to have a tough lift. And then you have what Rob just described. Then you have the phoniness of, yes, we're going to attend it, but nothing has happened.
Exactly.
So how do you balance those two on that the outside of this room, though? I have a struggle with some areas, like if you were on, and economically speaking, if you were on commission sales, it wouldn't make any difference what color you were, purple, pink, or what have you, because the value to the operation of that entity would be of what your production would be. Yeah, I guess you could carry that into pro sports, but I know there's but how do you bring the base of economic value of paying attention to, besides of the obviously the social aspects of humans being equal? It seems to me there's some areas I've seen where they've gotten the environment or the culture where it really are coming together, the esprit de corps of coming as one, no matter what you are. So I mean, how do you do that balance to get outside of people like this, where we all nod our head and we're drinking the Kool-Aid, to downtown? When I say downtown, I mean outside of here. How do you get the culture of the community, no matter where you are?
Yeah. No, I that's such a valuable question, and it's a kind of a tricky one, because I feel like you. I feel like, well, look, there's a moral imperative for equity, but at the same time, I hear what you're saying. How do we actually make a business case for it? How do we really tell folks that this is beyond? Because not everybody is going to share those values, that there is a moral imperative for equity, that to have these growing disparities is just morally not a good thing. We do have to actually make a business case for it. And I know, I come out of a community organizing, social justice background, work with a lot of civil rights folks, and there's a dissonance there. They don't want to talk about it in terms of the economic value of diversity and equity and inclusion. But quite frankly, we actually do have to make that case. And you know what? Foundations and academia have already made the case for us. They've already done so much of the research to say that, quite frankly, well, first of all, just from a demographic perspective, I heard 2050 would be the year when we really move towards having more people of color in the United States than having white representation. And every 10 years when we get the census, it gets shorter and shorter and shorter. So now it's 2042 as opposed to 2050. And honestly, I think it's actually sooner than that. So one small thing is just the reality in terms of numbers. What institutions want to be relevant in the next 10 to 15 years, 20 years? Who will you be if you're not speaking to the population right now that is in our schools, that will be in our high schools, that will be going to our colleges, that will be the power brokers in the next 15 to 20 years? So that's part of it. But even if you don't want to go there, if you feel like, well, I'm not going to be around here in 2042, right now, so much of the research is so compelling about the need for diversity around the table. The most competitive companies, I love that the for-profit folks have already gotten this. corporate America is so ahead, believe it or not, they're so ahead of the curve in terms of diversity and inclusion issues because they know that there is a business case for it. Organizations that have more diversity, and not just in terms of race and ethnicity, but also gender diversity. Did anybody hear about the Google moment where there was a big panel discussion and they were talking about feminism, and two of the men, and it was who's the replacement for Steve Jobs? I can't remember his name.
Andy, what's his name?
Well, so the two men on the panel kept interrupting the one woman on the panel, talking over her around feminism. And somebody in the audience said, excuse me, can I just note that you've interrupted this one woman on the panel repeatedly. I'm just saying that the days of looking at those kinds of dynamics and not saying anything, I think they're gone. I think that we just have a compelling need to stay relevant as one. The research is also saying that organizations and companies that have diversity are far more able to deal with change. They are far more competitive because they've got the creative juices around the table. But look, I could go on, but I hear what you're saying. How do we continue to lift up the business, the bottom line business value of diversity and equity? And I think we can. I think we can do both. I used to believe that all I needed to do was to sell you on justice. But honestly, actually, the corporate America said, yeah, justice is fine, but actually the bottom line is, and I think that we can make that case too. Absolutely, I think that's a really valid question. I don't think we should not address that. I think that you all need to address that in your communication plan around in terms of how you talk about these issues. Okay, so I want to just say that you've got this here, in terms of some suggestions in terms of best practices, and this piece around if your systems and your structures don't change, don't be surprised if things don't change. And then the last piece is just ongoing reflection. Have a feedback loop, adjust, and change as needed. And these 3 bullets here, I just encourage you all, if you're looking for language in your respective organizations or downtown to give them, this comes out of the Denver Foundation. And these 3 bullets, this is what they say in terms of organizations that are highly effective in dealing with issues of equity and inclusion. So I'll leave that with you. Let me do a quick time check, because this is what I most want us to spend time on, is talking about the organizational culture, taking a look at a framework and talking about the organizational culture that might exist here on this council. Are you all willing to do that with me?
Yeah.
Who feels really uncomfortable about doing that?
Charles.
No, seriously.
Okay.
Because I think it's easy for us to say yeah.
Yeah.
Part of the Oregon culture is we like to be polite and we like to be nice.
Right.
But when
Not
we,
everyone.
well, yeah. But I think when we start to peel back the layers, the question, when the question is asked, not only what are we willing to admit, but what are we willing to give up by admitting?
Yeah.
Both the internal pieces, I don't know if we're prepared for that.
Okay, fair enough. I think that's, so, one of the things that as you all continue to have these conversations, this is what I say to other organizations, the 2 things that I would encourage you to be committed to is being committed to being as uncomfortable as you can stand it. Because really at the end of the day, you're not on the front lines. You're not gonna have any bodily harm here. So be as uncomfortable as you're willing to stand it. And the other is be dedicated to the truth.
I'll say it another way. One of the hard things as the big black man at the table is to always be the person who has to push back. And the pushback, whether purposeful or not, that occurs when you are that person.
Yeah.
Right? And part of the toughness around these conversations, because, part of then what starts to happen is you start to get excluded.
Yeah.
Right? And people don't want to admit that they do that, but they do.
Yeah.
And so critical to sort of the awareness and having this conversation, exploring it in an honest way, is people admitting that hopefully won't happen out of the conversation again.
Yeah, yeah.
And if it does, giving me the privilege to call it out.
Yeah, absolutely. And quite frankly, identifying some more support around this committee so that you're not the only one calling it out, and that there are people around this table who maybe not today, but eventually, well, maybe today, will say, no, I am somebody working against racism, and I am an ally on this issue, and you don't have to be the one to always raise the issue. Let's identify some people. Maybe we can get a few volunteers today, so that you don't have to be the one that's calling it out all the time. We're going to come back to that. But I appreciate you being honest about it. What's hard about doing this work. Yes.
I guess when I think about this, it's different from what Charles was saying, but I don't know everyone. Even if I've been on this council since it started, I really don't feel that I know everybody as much as I would necessarily feel comfortable in doing something. I'll do it. The other thing is it's being televised. So people those are some of the things I've had reservations from knowing when we were going to do something. I'm willing to do it,
That's a
but
good
those
point.
are
That's a good point.
things that I
Yeah.
guess I'm thinking, will people judge me? Of course they will. That's what we do. But I'll just put that out there.
Well, so this is going to be somewhat, let's create as safe a container as we can, given the fact that it's televised. Yeah, it's public record and it's televised. This is going to be what we're going to be doing is an exercise for the purpose of a conversation. So I don't want you all to, at another time, in another place, in another space, we might have a different conversation that is really tied very closely to your own specific, this is how I show up, this is who I am, this is what I believe. For today, because I think that I really appreciate you saying that. This is being televised, it's gonna be a public record, and you all, each of you should feel comfortable revealing as much as you want to reveal. So I totally support you in that. So I'm gonna set this up and I'm gonna ask questions, and I trust you all in revealing as much or as little as you feel comfortable revealing. Okay? And the other thing that would be helpful to know is that what we're assessing isn't any one individual. We're talking about a culture of the council, but maybe that's a little bit safer, right? Okay, yeah,
So
Pam?
yes, thank you. Two things. I just want to remind you that we have a council member on the phone. And so in these kinds of conversations, it's sometimes hard to remember that because they're represented by a
you.
little box
Tim,
here.
Tim's on the phone, right?
Tim's on the phone, that's
Okay.
right. And then the second thing is, I want to offer maybe just a slightly different perspective about the televised piece. I think it's important to know. I actually think it's very cool. And what I mean by that is, these issues are really difficult, they're really personal, they're really sensitive, and they take a ton of courage. And the fact that we're about to start, and I see it as a start, we're about to start a conversation in a very public space with a very public body shows, number one, some level of vulnerability and some level of courage on our part, all of which we're going to need a boatload of if we're really serious about addressing these issues going forward. So
Absolutely.
I think it's fabulous, even though it's kind of scary,
Yeah.
that we're televised, that we're being vulnerable and courageous about this by getting this started.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And Eva? Yeah.
Thank you. Well, I think everybody here has good intentions, and I think that we should all recognize that too. And like you said earlier, we only know what we know.
Right, right.
And so, like, while it's scary to put out there what we might know or not know, we're supposed to learn from it and not perpetuate the judgment.
Right, right, absolutely.
And all of our meetings are a public record.
And we always agree.
We always do a really great job of agreeing. No, and I imagine that I'm not the only one that's been called out in public. Like, hey, I know you.
Right.
You do something. You've said something. So yeah, we just get to be put in a different spotlight today.
Right. Thank you both.
Can I just
Okay.
say something here real quick? I know you want to
Yeah.
get started in this activity. For me, I just want to throw in just this thought process that having done this work for multiple years and multiple different kinds of settings, I find that for me, the only difficulty with this is that I'm struggling with the term, not any of the terms of where we might land, but the term culture. Because I'm not certain that we have created, from my perspective, a culture of this committee. So it's a lot harder to assess the culture than it is to respond to what I believe, I think I know about the culture, that I drop in intermittently, that I come to meetings late, I talk to people on the phone, I go to subcommittee, so I'm not really certain about the culture, but I think there's such power in having multiple perspectives to begin to understand that that's the only way this work will move forward, is to value that there are multiple perspectives and that we're all over the place. That just because Charles and I may appear to be the same, that we probably are coming from this work very differently, as would be necessarily looking around the table, period. So I think there's some true value in it. I have no fear of it. I've been out there too many times, too many others. So that isn't the issue. It's that I'm not certain about the quality of my response being helpful, because I don't know that I totally get what the culture is. That's my only hesitation. So I am going to participate, but that's my hesitation. I just want to be honest about that.
Okay, fair enough. Let's read through these stages together and see if that helps. Because even not having a culture is a culture.
Right.
So let's see. And can I get some support, just somebody to volunteer to read the first 1 and 2, the heading, and then underneath the heading, how it's defined. And this is from page 3, called Organizational Stages of Diversity and Inclusion, and it's based on some research done by Dr. Bailey Jackson and Evangeline Holvino, and it's been adapted from that research. And again, after we go through this, I'd love to hear you all just push back on it to say, look, this doesn't speak to me, or this isn't really my experience of how I think about organizations. So it's food for thought, right? So I thank you for volunteering. I see you making eye contact with me.
What?
Yeah. So
Sure.
1 and 2, if you could do exclusionary organization and the club organization.
Exclusionary organization, an organization that is openly exclusionary in its mission and organizational structures. The club organization does not openly advocate against diversity and inclusion, but the organization is structured to maintain the status quo. White men make up most of the top leadership on staff and the board. They set the tone for the organization's mission. That setting up, it sounds like my house. I have 2 men in my house. They set the tone for the organization's mission, policy, practices, and cultural norms. These norms are seen as correct and are used to define and maintain the organization's culture. Others may participate, but are required to assimilate and fit into the defined culture norms.
Thank you. Martha? So you actually raised something that was really helpful. I hope you all, if you find it helpful, think about this, not just in terms of this council, but in other places, other organizations that you're working with, in partnership or work in. Great. Can somebody else take number 3, the compliance token organization?
Go ahead.
And then can you do the next one? Thank you so much.
Free compliance token organization committed to removing some of the rigidness inherent in the club, but does not want to make too many waves. Hires more women and people of color, especially in entry-level positions. May hire a person of color or woman in a management position as long as he/she does not challenge the organization's mission or practices and is seen as fully qualified. In this organization, women and people of color are clear that there is a ceiling on how high they can go.
Thank you. And Christina, or is it Krista? Yeah, thank you.
Affirmative action organization, committed to eliminating the rigidness in the club organization. Women, people of color, and other targeted groups are actively recruited for employment at all levels of the organization. The organization actively supports the growth and development of traditionally targeted groups, but only in ways that do not challenge the organizational culture or status quo. Encourages non-sexist and non-racist thinking and behavior. However, norms and practices are still established by a white male culture and are expected to be maintained.
Okay, if we can get somebody to do 5, redefining and self-renewing organization. Thank you.
redefining self-renewing organization is self-reflective and in transition. Questioning organizational norms is not just tolerated but encouraged. It openly examines all aspects of the organization's mission, policies, practices, and management styles to see how they may negatively affect the personal growth and success of all staff, especially historically excluded groups. Recognizes the organizational benefits to diversity and inclusion and includes a wide range of cultural perspectives in the organizational culture. Diversity is reflected throughout the organization.
And I'll do this last one. Inclusive organization. It reflects the values of diversity and inclusion in its mission, policies, practices, and cultural norms. Diverse cultural and social perspectives are represented and supported throughout the organization. There is an awareness and a respect given to diverse cultural groups, whether or not they're present in the organization. And that is, to me, a defining aspect of an inclusive organization. These folks don't have to be around the table, but the culture supports them when they show up. There's an awareness and respect given to diverse cultural groups, whether or not they're represented in the organization, and diversity is reflected at all levels of the organization, certainly when it can be, and the organization is committed to diversity and inclusion through and through. And these are not necessarily stages that an organization must go through. It might be helpful to see each so-called stage as separate and distinct and not as a prerequisite to get to the next. Okay, so an organization may start at any place and move at any place. So I just offer this as something to think about, to see if it's helpful. And certainly I can tell you, I've worked in organizations that fall along this spectrum. It was really clear, and some of them were organizations where people of color were in leadership positions, but the cultural norms and values were set really by our white colleagues. So it was very helpful for me to think about this as a framework. I may be helpful for you to think about it as a framework. And what I'd like us to do is to try to see if you can think about this council, the Early Learning Council, your interactions with each other. I mean, there is a culture here. And even if that culture is hard to put your finger on, maybe it's more than one culture in terms of how you all operate. And to be helpful about what I mean, it's the unstated things that you all take for granted. It's the culture of how you start the meetings, what time. You all know what those unspoken rules are. That's the culture of this council, right? It's the way you all speak to each other. It's the class assumptions embedded around this table. It's all of your norms. What? Oh, I'm sorry. I just wanted to make sure we weren't leaving anybody out. So that's what I mean by the culture of this council.
So
yeah,
I have just a clarifying. I've done this kind of work with organizations in which we really were relating to each other on a regular basis.
Yeah.
And the things, we work together. What I'm struggling with is we hardly know each other.
Okay.
And I'm sure that we have culture. I'm sure we have norms that we all know we all know how to behave.
Yeah.
But I'm struggling to go deep like you're discussing because I don't do deep things with this group.
Okay.
I come every other month for a few hours, and I do some work in between with some people. So I think if you could just talk about that kind of organization, it would help me at least. Because all of this sounds like the other kinds of organizations I'm used to being part of, and where it's easier for me to get into this. And so if you could just help us transition to this kind of organization.
Well, let me ask you, based on what you know about the way you all operate and the people around this table, what is your gut telling you? Is any of this applicable, or does it feel like it's just trying to compare apples to oranges? Like this kind of a matrix just doesn't apply at all here. Is that what I'm getting from you all? Like
That wasn't what I was saying.
Okay.
No, I mean, sorry if that's what it sounded like. I just feel like I need a transition. I mean, I know what it means in organizations that I work in or that I live in, or, you know, that it's harder for an organization where I have so few interactions
yeah.
with other members. And I just was looking for a transition, not relevant, no, very relevant.
Yeah,
I'm
okay.
just asking for a transition.
I think Harriet and Bobby are saying what I was trying to say, that I respect the ideas, but like when I say I don't know people well enough, I don't know, we don't exchange that many things. It's pretty superficial.
Okay.
And I think I know what our values, what we believe our values are, and that they're shared. But it's my belief of that.
Okay.
Just in the little bit I know of people.
Okay. I see this hand here, Eva, and then Lynn.
I think I've been putting it in the frame of not just like our interaction, but how we impact policy statewide, and how this ripple effect will hopefully, for the better, impact, you know, the other work that's being done in the state. Like, let's set the example and let's figure out a way to make it work, even if we don't have that deep personal connection or whatever. How do we fit in with this, and then get to the inclusive organization so that it becomes a state norm?
You know, I'm gonna, Lynn, and then I'm gonna say something, and we're gonna try this, and if it doesn't, you know, land, then that's okay, we can talk about it afterwards. Lynn.
So, two things. One, we are an entity focused on meeting the needs of a designated population in a new and different way. And so I think how we communicate and think culturally does affect that mission and our success there. So I think that's absolutely true. I also want to just gently push back on whether we know each other, because some of us have been working together for 5 years now, and if we have a culture where we don't know each other after 5 years on some level, whether that's something we need to address up front, because we should be better at that. I do think this is productive and helpful, because I think we have an obligation as a functioning entity with the mission that we have to have an organizational culture, that is inclusive and also that is comprehensible to people who are watching us and interpreting what we do, oftentimes in inaccurate ways, sometimes accurately, but sometimes, sometimes the people who are watching us are applying a bunch of cultural stereotypes from their perspective, and that doesn't work either if we're to achieve our mission. So I think you have to start with what is the culture of our organization. We have to take that on as a responsibility and be clear about it, because it exports to the work we're doing. And also just because in terms of best practice, it's 2015. Right?
Yeah.
So, and I actually think it's not going to be 2042. I bet it's like 2025. I mean, and I think that's going to help all of us move faster, better. So I think that's just the piece I want to set out is I think this is the right approach. I think this is the right kind of focus and exercise for the reasons that I just said. And I won't say them again because that's part of my culture. Exactly.
Okay.
So I've ever started doing that.
That's funny.
So let me.
He knows I.
Let me say this, and then I'm going to ask you all to just see if you can find where you think this council is. And again, then we'll talk about it, because maybe you're all right. But I will say this. You tell me if someone came into this space and joined this council and had different access needs in terms of just physical mobility, how would they feel? Would they feel welcomed? Would, the space support them? Or how about a young transgender male of color, a young trans youth? Could they come to this council and feel, you all have a sense of who would feel comfortable around this table and who wouldn't. If there was somebody who showed up here who was from a radically different socioeconomic background, so much so that they might not be able to read the printed materials that you all have, would they feel comfortable here? You know, that's the beautiful thing about culture, is it's just like you just don't see it. You all are very class defined. I'm going to tell you that you are. You're very class defined. You're very literate. This is a highly intellectual group here. You all have access and resources to be able to come to this. There's a culture here. So there's a racial culture here. So I want to help you all lift that up because I think that there could be some benefit there. Okay, so now having said all that, if you feel that you have a sense that maybe the council falls anywhere here along this continuum, we've posted them up on the wall for you. And I'd like to invite you to, and you please know that this is totally optional for all the reasons that we said earlier, right, about it being televised and people feeling like they're not sure about who the people are around the table. But if you can go past those two things, you feel comfortable enough, I'd like to invite you to stand up and just stand in front of the marker that to you kind of best represents, if there were a culture here, which one of these stages it would be. Yes, Lynn.
And I don't know if this is helpful, it may be, but in my mind, I have a perception of what our culture is from 5 years of work.
Yeah.
And I have a perception of what external organizations view our culture as being. Yeah. And those are two different things.
Okay.
And it may be helpful to do both.
Okay.
To have us go through the exercise twice.
I like that. So which one do you want to do first?
It's up
Your
to you.
internal, I'd like to do the one, how do you all perceive it?
Yeah.
Let's do and then we could do another round of how you think you're perceived from the outside. I think that would be helpful. Thanks, Lynn. Okay, so let's do it. Well, you all get up and move and tell me, where you think the organization, and you can, use your stages definition if you need to.
Internally.
So, so each group, we're gonna just need you to do a little bit of report out. You all know your assignment? Were you able to share with them?
Yeah.
Okay. Rob's gonna do it, okay. Okay, folks.
So can I ask a question? Are they all in that, or are they in that?
I think, yeah, this group, are you a part of the club over here?
We're squishy.
Okay. No problem. You all will reveal yourself and define yourself when it's your turn to report out. So we're gonna just go right
Bobby
around.
and I are squishy over here. Okay.
Beautiful, I love the fluidity of it. So we're gonna, just two things I need to hear from you all is just a little bit, just one sentence rationale and one quick example. And I know this is a short changing it, but all of this is to invite you all to come back to this conversation. What an opportunity for you all to just continue to unpack this. What an opportunity to say, maybe we need to get to know each other better, given the nature of the work we're doing together. Okay. So you're here in the exclusionary organization,
Yeah.
and your rationale and your example.
I think there's a clear culture of here's the line, here's what we need said, go do it. So the example would be, so there's someone in leadership who, I've called and haven't emailed, hadn't gotten any return communication.
When you say somebody in leadership, is this person on this council?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so that's a good example. That's what it feels like to be excluded.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you for the rationale and thank you for the example. Okay, and you all over here,
I'm a little bit squishy, but I think maybe toward this end, but I think Rob.
Yeah, so the very fact that I'm the person they chose to have speak, I think is part of the culture of who we are, right? So I thought it was interesting that we stood here and said, well, who's going to talk? And I really didn't want to very badly, and it was very quickly, Rob, you do it, right? And so I just think that speaks to some degree,
Well, you
for
said you
whatever
could
that's
sum it
worth.
up for us.
I know, but I have to take a second to pontificate. I just think it's interesting. So anyway, I don't know, I read the description and I was somewhere between 2 and 3 for us probably, but the idea that we're committed to removing some of the rigidness, but we don't want to make too many waves. I think that is like right in the heart of a descriptor for us. And for lots of organizations, right, it is that too many waves, and so how do you define too many?
Yeah.
And the truth of the matter is, when you're not making too many, you're not making enough, probably, and that's why you end up in 2 or 3. That there's the idea that we would want to make some hires and that kind of thing that are specifically targeted to equity. And I think that we get to that place where that's what we want to do, but it isn't. But we notice it when we do it, right? It isn't just that we make a hire or whatever, but we make a hire and we notice it, right? This is something that happened and is special, or something, tells me that we're right here.
Yeah.
So those would be a couple of kinds of things, and that there probably is some. There probably very much are some allowances around that when it comes to advancing and so forth.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Great examples. And I want, just to be fair, is this a separate group here, or you all are a part of the same? Okay, just sort of a yes. And you have
actually, so I
yeah.
have I think I have a perspective that's a little bit different because I run the agency that the council oversees, and I think that the division is actually in a place where we're moving from a compliance and token organization to an affirmative action organization, which is not where I want us to stay. But when I read the description of affirmative action organization, that sounds more like the work that we're doing as staff every day, which may be a function of the fact that it's our jobs. And we spend a lot of time working together on these on issues related to equity, and we've made it a focus of many people's job descriptions. So I think that the council, in my opinion, is maybe a little bit closer to this edge. I also just want to notice that none of the people of color on our council were willing to go further than token organization, which is important to notice. But I think as a division, we've moved a few steps closer in this direction, so I'm kind of squishy in between.
Thank you so much for your candor. You all are great. Okay. And I like these two. You are very specific in where you're standing, so let's hear from you.
To the right of the flag.
Yeah, exactly. So, a couple of things. We want to acknowledge, sort of as a caveat, 2 things. We see ourselves in all of these stages. And depending on what example, we could pick an example, to your point, to illustrate us being in all of these places. The second sort of caveat is that we are nested in a larger, this group is nested in a larger culture, some of which we have absolutely no control over. An example of which is we don't have any control over who comes to our table. Those are appointed outside of here, and while we have tried at various times to influence that with not great degrees of success always. So we want to acknowledge that. So we are standing in between affirmative action and redefining. And some of it has to do with our aspirations about the direction that we want to head, quite frankly. But to give a couple of examples, an example of where we might be an affirmative action organization is just the commitment that the council has to taking the equity lens, which other organizations have adopted but haven't done anything with. We adopted it, we said we want not just a committee, but we want the committee to create something that is actionable for us to do something with. So that's a commitment to being action-oriented, and so we saw ourselves there in some ways. And we saw ourselves moving in this direction, a recent example of which is we hired an outside evaluator to give us an independent evaluation of how our funding strategies impact disproportionate populations that we're charged with addressing. So we're making commitments, but we're hoping we're somewhere in here.
I'd like to make one comment about gender. The minute the topic becomes young children, you become female dominated. And so what's interesting, and the council has reflected it as anything I've ever worked in, because I've always worked in early learning, is always female dominated. So it's interesting to me that the few men who are present and participate may still get differential. That when we are so dominantly, I mean, we struggle for gender equity. The struggle is to bring men in. We need men's voices on this topic, and they're very hard to get.
And we'll talk a little bit more about this. Actually, we won't talk more about this because we don't have time, but I will say, I love that statement because it makes the distinction between culture and representation. So you can have, this group could be all women and still have a culture that is very patriarchal and sexist. So that's how powerful this stuff is. How many levels do we have to do the work? All of these levels. But thank you for that. Thank you. And we're going to hear from this last group, and then you all can just take your seats.
So this group is the Redefining Self-Renewing, and Dick's word is entrepreneurial. And I think, and remember, this is where we see ourselves as opposed to where we see the broader external world sees us.
Yeah.
And that's a really important distinction, because
Yeah.
I don't think we would put ourselves here. I think the distinction is that we're all excited by, and this is a different perspective, we all are excited by the opportunity to change the status quo dramatically for overrepresented populations. And we view our efforts as doing that in an entirely different way than it has been done in the past, i.e. driven by evidence-based practice and results as opposed to the forces of the status quo.
Yeah.
So I think, although we would acknowledge that the organization itself and the culture of the ELC may not fully reflect that, may not communicate that, I think there's a strong sense in our communication that we view the priority as urgent, critical, and has to be driven by something other than what everyone is doing today. Because what is being done today should be the cause of civil disobedience. The results we are producing for disproportionate populations are entirely unacceptable in Oregon.
Yeah.
And we view ourselves as at the very forefront of taking the hits and the pressure of making that change for those populations. And so I think that's really critical to say, because the first, I was sharing, the first conversation I had when this effort began was what we needed to do was sit down and be quiet, because all the existing people were getting the job done and they just needed hundreds of millions of more dollars to do it, even though they were serving less than 1% of the population of need. So I just want to put that out there because it's really critical. There isn't any interest in our efforts of doing what is currently being done because it's a dismal failure.
Thank you. Okay, folks. Thank you very much. Feel free to sit down, and I do see your hand, but can you ask the question from your seat? Yeah. Can you ask it while you're walking to your seat?
It's not really so
that
much
means
the question.
I'm out of time.
Yeah, somebody brought up in our group, the squishy group over there,
Yeah.
which I think was something that I kind of felt, and that's why I was more on the club side too, is that there are a lot of decisions that are made at a higher level that then we get told, like, this is the direction we're taking, yes or no.
Okay, so that brings me to maybe a closing point, and I'm going to keep it moving because in the interest of time, I want to make sure that I hand this off and at least tell you about these other handouts before we have to close. I think that this is a really good way to kind of wrap up this conversation around this culture discussion. And I think the two things that I would say is, if you don't have to be. I'm sorry. I just get distracted when I hear other people talking, and it's a facilitator thing because I feel like, oh, small group discussion. Do you want to be a part of this? So I apologize. I don't mean to be making you feel uncomfortable. But the thing that I would say is that where you all have so much agency, when I'm working with organizations who say, look, our demographics are, we're in a predominantly white state, we're in a predominantly white community, we can't do very much, we're limited. But you have the power to change the culture. And this may sound counterintuitive, but you don't folks, it doesn't have to be about representation right now. Your number one priority doesn't need to be, look, we need to make sure that there are more people of color on this council. Work with what you have. I mean, that would be good. That would be good. But work with what you have, which is you all have the power to control this council and to some extent your own agency, even if some of it is informal. Maybe there's some social ways that you all want to get together. And the other thing is you all can push back. You can push back hard. I'd like to see someone say no when all of you come to consensus on this is the direction we need to take. Somebody somewhere is gonna have an agenda and they're gonna put it on you. You all, if you can come to consensus on what you feel is best, you can just claim your authority. So I want to close out on that because I think that the culture has power. You all can influence the culture, and I think that you all can influence those influencers by coming to consensus. Let me just at least tell you what is in here, and I'm going to leave you with kind of an assignment to do after I leave. These are some of the traps that can stall your effort and some strategies that can really lift up your work. And this is on page 4. And I trust you to go over this together. Maybe you can dedicate some time at another meeting to check in on some of these things. Maybe you can say, actually we're doing a lot of these things, or we're not doing a lot of these things. And I want to lift a couple of them up for you quickly. Number 5, not wanting to upset anyone or feel uncomfortable. Listen, the barometer of comfort should not be defined by those with the most privilege, access, and be uncomfortable. The other, don't have a few folks burn out like Sarita. Not to put you on the spot, Sarita, but let's spread the organizational commitment with the organizational structure to support the work, because a few folks holding this up, it's ripe for burnout. And the other is, the myth of the happy ending. This work preceded us. This is the 50th anniversary of Selma. We've had 400 years and 500 for our indigenous brothers and sisters that used to be here, of folks being marginalized. So we're not going to finish this stuff overnight. No one in this room woke up and said, I think I will create some structural barriers today. So it's not about you, right? It's about a systemic structural problem that we're trying to resolve. So try not to take it personally. This is so not about you. And then just a couple more. I'll leave you to read these. I'll leave you to read these for yourself. So that's just a tiny little resource. And can we just quickly, should we do the spoken word? Do we have time to do the 2-minute spoken word closing? Okay, we'll do that and then wrap up. And so this is, I like this because what I said is that I work with organizations all the time who are in this first category. They value diversity. But my challenge to you all is to move beyond that, to actually operationalize it, right? So if I could have Marlene, you're going to be the value diversity spokesperson, and this is, I did not know you before this, so I don't want folks to feel like you and I are in some sort of
Cahoots?
Yeah, cahoots, thank you. Charles, if you can be the managing diversity spokesperson, you're going to just go back and forth. Marlene, you're going to say valuing diversity, and then you'll read your statement.
Could I suggest something? 'Cause
Yes, please.
I play this role out around here. It would be really good to have one of the, I think Pam
I think you're right.
would be great.
I think you're right. That was
Yeah.
my inclination too, but I felt like, we've already set it up. Anybody want to volunteer? You don't have to do it.
Oh,
Thank you for saying
volunteered me. I'll do it.
that. Okay, Pam, wonderful.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, so let's do this, and do it with some gusto.
All right.
Let's close this out for now.
Valuing diversity. Organization states that it values diversity.
Managing diversity involves a stated value and commitment to diversity and inclusion that's tied to an organizational mission or purpose.
Valuing diversity. Senior leadership feels that diversity is inherently good.
Managing diversity. Senior leadership is committed to diversity and inclusion and models and leads from those values.
Valuing diversity. Caring that diversity exists.
Managing diversity. Setting up organizational structures and systems that allow for an environment of equity and inclusion.
Valuing diversity. Openness to diversity among people.
Managing diversity implements actual strategies and tools to increase and support the diversity of its members.
Valuing diversity resists any disruption to the status quo.
Managing diversity takes into account that the organizational culture will be disrupted and plans accordingly.
Valuing diversity is committed to organizational stability.
Managing diversity is committed to organizational change.
Valuing diversity requires no action or tangible results.
Managing diversity requires action, accountability, and results.
Valuing diversity utilizes disconnected short-term activities.
Managing diversity uses concerted, organized, strategic, and long-term efforts.
Valuing diversity, relatively easy position to take.
Managing diversity, very difficult work to be done.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much for being so gracious and for really going with me here. I'm going to step back, but I just want to say this, my closing comment to you. Be bold. What do you have to lose? Be bold. What's at stake? You all are great. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Carmen. So I think I'm going to turn it over to Sarita, and she's just going to summarize our report for you, and then if we have a little bit of time, hopefully we'll have some time for questions.
Sure. Okay, well, I'm Sarita, the Equity Director at the Early Learning Division, and I just want to thank you for giving us the opportunity to present our work. I'm going to be focusing on giving an overview of the process that the Equity Subcommittee went through in developing the recommendations, describe the structure of the report, and then describe some potential next steps towards implementation. This exercise fit nicely because it's also reflective of from August to January work that the Equity Subcommittee went through, and the similar process that we went through to developing the organizations. So over the course of the year, there were 8 subcommittee meetings. During the initial subcommittee meetings, the recommendations were developed, and then they were grouped into 3 categories: culturally responsive practices, early learning operating systems, data and resource allocation. And a work group was developed to focus its efforts on each of those categories. So there was one work group for each category. The role of the work groups were to identify implementation approaches that would go along with the recommendations to really bring them to life. And there were 2 sessions for each work group, for a total of 6 sessions and meetings, or face-to-face meetings, in combination with one-on-one interviews. We had Diana Bender, who's our Build Equity consultant, conduct one-on-one interviews with the Equity Subcommittee members, and we also engaged in multiple opportunities for community review, that through meetings, through conference calls, through emails, et cetera. The list goes on and on. And from there, we packaged the recommendations, the implementation approaches, passed it down to Carmen Morgan, who was responsible for identifying existing tools and resources that would be paired with each category. And I think it's important to describe the different categories. So culturally responsive practice really speaks to comprehensively addressing power relationships through the acknowledgement that culture informs how we communicate. It shapes the way that we receive information and frames the thinking process of groups and individuals. And I believe that our simulation activity really demonstrated that today. And it ultimately does impact the way that we make decisions. The early learning operating systems category was focused on establishing equity-informed systems that would sustain Oregon's early learning organizations and their abilities to produce positive outcomes. So when we talk about early learning organizations, we're talking about the Early Learning Council, Early Learning Division, the Early Learning Hubs, Early Learning Providers. And then the data and resource allocation category was focused on using data to inform decision-making about how and where funding is allocated to close opportunity gaps, and as a result, gaps in achievement, to ensure quality of care for all Oregon's children with a very specific focus on our most underserved. The toolkit, as I mentioned earlier, has resources identified to go with each section of the report. It's important to note that we had 2 guiding resources and tools, and these guiding documents were essential or critical in our work because they were cross-category examples, meaning that we were able to really braid and connect all 3 of those sections so that we can't do one without the other. We can't do culturally responsive practice without developing policies and systems, which are the recommendations outlined in the operating systems. And we can't do that without resource allocation. And it's almost like you could start in any area, and it's more of like a circular interconnected relationship. Those 2 tools were the tool for organizational self-assessment related to racial equity, and the second tool was the protocol for culturally responsive organizations. Moving on to the next steps, or the potential next steps for implementation, would be to design or identify an equity implementation team that would have to consider to what extent is it valuable, is it critical, is it significant to customize tools and resources specific to Oregon's early learning system? To what extent is it possible to develop curriculum that allows early learning organizations across the board to implement these recommendations? And it's also important to acknowledge that equity has been identified as as a breakthrough initiative in the early learning division. It's been identified as a capability breakthrough, meaning that we'll be focusing our efforts on identifying ways to build capacity so that all ELD staff is functioning in an equity-informed manner and way. And I think I tried to keep it short and sweet so that I could include as much of the components as possible. Charles, did you have a question?
So first, thank you so much to both of you for your leadership. This is the meetings I was able to attend. It's been amazing. Secondly, when we sort of met as a group, we talked a lot about sort of this threshold around funding. And when I was reading through, I don't think I saw that.
Charles, can you talk up a little bit?
Hey, Kali. So I was talking about sort of when we were meeting, we talked a lot about sort of the funding component. And I think we had come up with like a 50% funding sort of goal for particularly kids of color. And I don't believe I saw that in the final report.
So I can address that one. So what we chose to, because of the 50% is probably already actually in play at this point, but we don't know yet. We have a group looking into the funding and the allocation of funding. We chose to reach to the goal of that, which was to prioritize these underserved populations in our resource allocation. So at this point, now the follow-up recommendation to the next implementation subcommittee that is recommended will be to start looking at is specific allocation of funding the direction we should be headed, and if so, what amount, what to take to start looking at that more in depth, because while we had it come up as an issue in our committee, we really did not. We didn't have the time to go to look at that more in depth, and I think it is deserving. I think it is deserving of more in-depth review, and that's the main recommendation, to get more specific down the road, because these the recommendations that we made are very broad and generalized, and we know that if we don't get specific in our goals and allocation of resources being one of those, then we don't know if we're going to be effective or how effective we're going to be. So at this point, that's the recommendation is to prioritize funding for those underserved populations, and hopefully the next group will get more specific and looking into funding specifics.
This is Tim Freeman. May I ask a couple questions?
Sure, Tim. Is that okay? Yeah, sure, Tim.
Thank you, and I appreciate the work that's being done, and I really appreciate you all allowing me to be on the phone today. I'm leaving this afternoon for a vacation, and it would have been very difficult to make it to Salem. So the first thing I'd like to sort of
Well, Tim, we were okay
Your
before
life's so
you
hard.
said you were going on vacation, but now maybe not.
Are you able to hear me okay?
Oh,
yeah.
Clearly, evidently.
So the first thing I'd like to mention is the word equity, and sort of a understanding we all have, but it can be a little bit tricky in that my intention being on this with this group is to bring everybody to the top. Equity also could be that you take dollars from the top and put them at the bottom, and somewhere in the middle everybody ends up being the same. So I want to make sure we're always consider equity as raising up everybody and helping everybody achieve the very best they can.
Absolutely,
The other challenge, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go right ahead.
I was going to say the other the challenge, and this is just a challenge that I learned when I was in the legislature, it's really as much as we spent a little bit of time talking about race today, there's also the challenge of urban and rural. So when we talk about achieving certain percentages of dollars to help certain populations, some communities can't achieve that. And I remember there was a few years ago, the Department of Education did a road tour with a granting opportunity, and I took the time in my community to be involved in making sure we presented a case that our folks down here that were in poverty needed help. We didn't even get past the first bar of the grant because we didn't have enough people of color in our community. So we just lost out on the opportunity before we ever started. And I said this at the last meeting, I'll continue to say it. I'll put our poor people up against anybody's poor people. We have the same challenges, the same lack of graduation rate, the same generational poverty as any group of people, regardless of color. So I'd like to make sure we keep that in mind as we put policies in place that we really need to try to help everybody be successful. And the last thing is just as an effort to, even though I didn't speak up in the last exercise because things look pretty quick, I will do just a quick pushback and do it as a frame of question. In the exercise we use with the different categories where we might assess where this organization's culture is, I wonder what that would look like if we were to take where it said white male out and enter black male, and if that would look racist if we entered it that way. Just a question as we sort of talk about trying to involve people, putting folks in categories of because they're a certain race, they believe a certain way, is not a good thing to do regardless of the race we're talking about. So that's what I had for you today.
Thank you. Thank you. Lynn?
So 3 points. One would be that I think the presentation and the work we had this morning, thank you for that. I think it was really clear. I think it left without an action step, which seems important to me, is I think that the Early Learning Council has to work together, has to be on the same team. We can't do good work if we're not. So if we need to do that work more to get on the same page, maybe not on it, I mean, we don't have to agree on everything, but we have to know what our culture is. We have to know what our strengths are, and I would encourage our director to come up with a proposal for how we finish the good work that I think you started. That's number one. Number two is, I think, I love in here all these charts showing who's not getting what they need out of Oregon's system, because that's where our work is why aren't these populations getting what they need to be successful, and how do we invest in proven methods to get them there, as opposed to what we also need to do is identify additional sources of funding, but deploying that funding to a result is our job one. So I want to make sure that we stay focused as we go forward here on that requirement. Third thing is an offer of help. Our organization is, the Oregon Health Authority now has mountains of metrics that are invaluable in driving results. And so, for example, we've identified out of those metrics already that we have a problem in certain parts of the state with certain populations getting women to their prenatal visits in a timely way. Interestingly enough, other parts of the states with the same racial, ethnic, socioeconomic group are hitting it out of the park. And so what we have the opportunity to do is take that data and say, okay, well, you people who are hitting it out of the parks, we'd like you to talk to these people over here. So number one, that data is available to the Early Learning Council, and we got really great, amazing data people. So we can use that exact same data we don't need to reinvent it. It's all geographically identified, socioeconomically, racially, et cetera, identified. So we can help with that. The part of that that is significant, though, and, that we need to focus on is there's some very good research from Kaiser Permanente that shows that in the healthcare expenditure model going forward, there's a period out about 7 years where, despite all our best efforts, there's going to be another sharp increase in healthcare costs. And interestingly enough, that comes from 0 to 9-year-olds not getting what they need, period. So that is our bread and butter of this council, is we are supposed to be intervening with those 0 to 9-year-olds in a very concrete, 0 to 5-year-olds, 0 through 5-year-olds, and getting on it. And I think the thing I'm going to make the case for is we got to get on it now. We can't talk about it anymore. We can't meet about it anymore. We need to identify what works and get on it, or those kids begin to consume a huge portion of the healthcare dollar in, I can't give you the exact number of years, but it's real soon. And so I think part of what I think we have to do with the good, very serious work you've done here is we have to identify 2 or 3 things that we've got to get done in the next 2 or 3 years. And we have to have the courage to say that has to get done. And it may look a whole lot different than anything we're doing now. But I do think that is, the Oregon Health Authority is committed to helping this work. It has a direct impact on our ability to sustain health care for Oregon's most vulnerable citizens. And we'll double down and work with you to do this. But it's urgent. It is way past urgent. And these data that we show, we can't move everything at once. We can't keep everyone happy. And we can't just keep doing what we're doing. So I think the council needs to identify what's the highest priority and how do we get on it quickly.
Thank you, Lynn. Yes, Megan.
Marlene, Lynn, I think you make such good points. I'm also such an action-oriented girl. I'm like, okay, now what's the step that we're going to take? At the back of your binder, behind the full chunky report, there's a summary of the recommendations. And I can tell you Early Learning Division staff are chomping at the bit to get to work on actually implementing what this report calls on us to do. So once or if the recommendations are approved today and we're empowered to move forward on the implementation side of the work, I will be the executive sponsor of, and Sarita will be the leader of, what we're calling a breakthrough team of ELD staff members with an external team of folks who will validate our work, and that will include members of the council as well as other folks from the communities impacted by this work, to launch what we think is probably 3 years of work to fully implement what's in the report and to implement the recommendations in the report. So we can avoid the trap of thinking about what's the quick fix, because we think it is probably a 3-year implementation window here. And there are some things that I think we can start to do really quickly. For example, changing some of the way that we do our contracting practices. We have all kinds of things that we can do administratively with the council's permission, commitment to work with us on. And I just want to notice that when Sarita and I really sat down to plan out what implementation might look like, I asked her how long, and she said 3 years, and I said, yeah, at least. So there will be a really specific implementation plan attached to this, with metrics attached to it in ways that we'll be measuring our progress over time, with both the short-term view of what can we impact quickly because the crisis is now, and the long view of undoing structural racism takes years.
Yep. Thank you. Great.
Yeah.
Can I say something?
Oh, I'm sorry. Dick is on the queue, and then I'll. Okay. Who is this? I'm sorry. Is it Kali?
This is Kali.
Okay.
I'm actually only 2 minutes away too, but I don't know if vote's gonna happen, and I want to say something before.
Sure. Go right ahead.
So, sorry. one point around the fact that I think it doesn't show up in the report. It came up a lot when we were discussing that we need better data on what is happening when it comes to education. We have a kindergarten readiness assessment. I've said a lot about it. I know it's not perfect, but there's nothing that explicitly says that we need to do a better job of collecting good data about what is happening for kids. That assessment was not implemented in an equitable way, and I feel like if no one says that, if it's never called out that we did not do a good job of really reflecting students of color in the best way possible to assess what their learning is, I just don't know when it will come out, and I feel like that is so hugely important to everything we do. If we're going to use certain information as baseline information, then we better do a better job collecting the information and really ensuring that we have accurate information about diverse populations. And that is not the case, and it's, you know, the data is sort of quoted in the report, but the fact that we weren't as good as we could have been in terms of the collection and really having equity at the center, I think is problematic. So I just wanted to say that I said it a lot at the subcommittee meetings, and to me it's important for the Early Learning Council to own that and really work towards better data collection and recognizing that we don't have a full picture until we improve that.
Thank you, Kali. I will point out that at page 30, we do discuss recommendations regarding the kindergarten assessment data, but you're correct, we didn't summarize the group's feeling that, and overall, I would say the temperature of the group was that the kindergarten assessment wasn't successful for children of color. Go ahead.
Marley, when you're done, this is Diana.
Oh, okay, thanks. Thanks. Sorry, Diana, I thought that was Kali. And so, but we do highlight collection of demographic data and just other recommendations in regards to the kindergarten assessment that, as Kali has mentioned, are important to include in that assessment process in order so we can identify issues with children of color and make sure that we're being effective in truly assessing their needs. Go ahead, Diana.
I just want to really reaffirm what Holly said, that the kindergarten assessment is really essential, and addressing that is really important. And that's what we were trying to get to on page 22. And I think that maybe in the recommendations, and I wonder if perhaps in the translation of it into more of an action step, like this is what we need to do, we missed the step of acknowledging that how it had been done was wrong. And so I just want to say the intention moving forward in the action plan that the staff is going to take on and the new committee, however it's developed, is going to take on, will have some really specific things that are outlined on page 22 to really address the kindergarten assessment in a very direct way. Thank you.
Thank you. Pam?
You gonna go to? Yes, sure, okay.
Go ahead, Dick.
Sorry,
no.
I think I cut him off.
Yeah, these strong women, right. What was that comment before? Charles, you even mentioned that or something, didn't you? Yeah, on the implementation, I think it's really,
I'm not touching that one.
on the implementation part of it, though, when we went through this value in diversity and managing diversity, you know, the cynic, we need to address, you know, on T accounts you have pluses and minuses. Well, this is an opportunity to have two pluses on this T account. You have the transformation of a life, which is very significant, but also it affects DOC, DHS, and OYA. And of course, we all know what those initials mean. $2 billion plus, I think it is. And so I think we need to show what the not only this is the right thing to do, of course, equality with everyone, yes, but also what it does on as far as being the high tide that does raise all boats. And so I think it's very significant to me that we make that argument so we get a broader base of saying, yes, we should embrace this culture that we're talking about. So it doesn't come from on high on, I just think that that's very important to be able to make the point that it's not only the right thing to do, but it involves our whole environment of livability, and it's what this country is all about. You can start, you know, do the national anthem and all of that stuff, but it's the truth. And so I think we need to hit that right between the eyes instead of quite make it quite so warm and fuzzy, and I mean, let's just address the fact that it does make a difference downtown or to the community as a whole. The
Taxpayer,
transformation of a life is very important, and it affects all of these things that are ills that are in our communities. That's costing us millions of dollars, billions of dollars. So I think we should also have a strategy on how we present that.
Absolutely, thank you, Dick, and Pam, and then Charles.
So I have a question and then a series of comments. My last comment is that, council members, we're gonna need to move on in the agenda, so I'm gonna ask that we have a motion. So that's the last comment, so I'm gonna move to first. My question, so it appears to me that in the recommendations, it's a mix of recommendations, some of which are directed at the early learning division, some of which are directed at the council, some of which are more interactive in terms of providing resource to hubs. Is that accurate? Is that fair to say?
Absolutely,
So
yes.
it's not just, so what we're adopting is not just about us and the actions for this council or a toolkit, which is part of the original charged for hubs and other organizations. It's sort of it's a mixed thing
Absolutely,
here.
because like, as I mentioned, we're not just in a vacuum. It's not just the council right here. We also impact the early learning division. We also impact hubs. We also impact, so that's why it is a mixture of action items, and that's why the recommendation is more work needs to be considered down the road, and hopefully, get on it as soon as possible.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Two comments in terms of business, just sort of implications for this council members. One is that I think, when we adopt these, and I'm going to say when we adopt these recommendations, these need to be woven into our strategic plan. We have a 5-year, you'll remember, rolling strategic plan. We've heard various timelines. We've heard various sort of urgencies. But I think these need to be adopted and brought forth and planted within our strategic plan so we don't lose track of them. And that strategic plan also is a mix of council and division and whatnot. So second, I just want to acknowledge that embedded in these recommendations is the recommendation for an ongoing, I know you're talking about as an implementation committee, but what I would see as an ongoing committee. So taken in conjunction with something yet to come on our agenda today, under the chair's report and Martha's piece, what we would effectively have at the end of today, if we adopt all of this, is that we would have a committee that for all intents and purposes is focused on some of the early experiences in life. There's sort of, I'm not putting age bounds around it, but I'm doing that for the purposes of illustration, 0 to 3-ish, right? And then we have a committee already established to sort of looking at issues related to childcare and early learning settings, and then we would have really an equity committee sort of woven through all of that. So if we adopt this and that, I just want to say explicitly for the record and for council members, that's the structure that we're adopting going forward. And then my comment, and then I'm going to ask that we have a motion. So my comment is, one of the things I like a lot about all of this, and again, I just want to echo the appreciation for the amount of work and the courage for all of you on the committee and the council today to start this work. One of the things I want to call out that I like about this is that my perspective is that if we continue in this state and in this council, if we think about equity as something that we add on top of what we do, but we never make it what we do, we're really fundamentally not going to change the outcomes. And so the approach here, although it's, I can't remember the adjective you used, Marlene, although it is not maybe specific as adopt X% of funding stream for Y, it is designed to get at changing systems and changing how we do our work, which I hope and think has I think to the point that our consultant said this morning earlier, it may not seem like the actionable thing right now. I think in the long run it will serve us well if we do things like use the data and do the implementation work that's coming. So
Pam, honoring this exercise, part of what you just said is clear demonstration of privilege. And let's play it out. So part of what you're lacking is the fact that there are communities in this state that do not trust anything we will do.
I think that's fair.
To assure their participation, we've got to, at times, as people who walk with privilege, we've got to exercise humility and humbleness and say, look, to get you to believe us, we're going to put this in writing and say, hold us accountable to that. 50% is a low number. right? To drive to any outcome. Like but we just had this amazing exercise that talked about honoring this, right? For us to do anything that then doesn't about face to that, kind of dilutes the last hour of our life. We've got to honor what people feel, right? We've got to honor their truth, and we've got to. If we turn away from their truth, we continue to walk in Oregon's dark legacy.
So I appreciate that, and I think you're spot on. And I think we have to have the courage to do it differently, because I think the collective we, who have privilege and who've been in these positions and who are now appointed to the council, have made decisions that have engendered mistrust. And I think that is a perfectly fair point. And I am hopeful that if and when the council adopts these recommendations and starts to show how we actualize our commitment that we've tried to verbalize, even though we view it from different lenses, we've tried to verbalize and be clear as a council where we want to head. We're not perfect. I hope that people will see it as a first step and sort of I think I described it to Sarita, or maybe it was Marlene, I can't remember, as it feels to me like we're peeling back the first layer of the onion. We got a lot of layers yet to go here. And council members, we do need a motion soon.
Rob, last question or comment.
Question or comment. Whenever it seems like I enter into this conversation with any group, one of the really hard discussions is race and poverty. And I was a 3 because I said I think that we are cautious about the size of the waves that we make. And so I would prefer to make a bigger wave than too small of a wave. I think we almost always make too small of waves. And there is so much evidence that indicates that when we talk about this, that we really got to put race in the center of the conversation and not poverty in the center of the conversation. So I just want to lay it out there and make a little bigger wave today by putting that in the room and saying, I think that if we don't do that, I'll just use my piece of data of evidence. If you look at the SAT, the ACT, or the OAKS, the Oregon Assessment of Knowledge and Skills, our most wealthy African American students will underperform or perform almost precisely at the same place as our poorest white kids. I cannot look at that data without putting race in the center of the conversation. And so when we talk about where are we gonna go when we have this conversation, are we gonna talk about poverty, or are we gonna talk about race? Now, unfortunately, in Oregon, a lot of times then we start talking about urban and rural, and it creates a weird dynamic. You look at the chart, you look at the map here of where students of color or children of color live in the state of Oregon, and it creates an urban and rural discussion that's difficult. But we are in the middle of a difficult discussion, and when we start talking about how are we going to allocate resource. To say we're going to allocate a specific percent of resource makes me nervous, because I think we need to do some things before we start targeting specifics. But I think you can say, but not less than.
Right.
Right. You can say, we don't know that 75% is right, or 50% is right, or 80% is right, but you can definitely say, but not less than. When you have that discussion, engender trust, focus more specifically on race, and get to a place that gives us a kickoff point that I would hope puts that more in the center of the conversation and still creates some trust where we need it.
And I think that's just a final comment. I think that's actually where our committee came to, was let's create a floor. We're not saying this is the maximum, or let's create a floor of what's the minimum that we're willing to devote to this population of underrepresented population. And so anyway, I think it's a discussion and something that we can continue to look into, and I hope that it will be addressed specifically, and I expect that Sarita will follow through with that, and Megan will follow through with that in the next stages of this process. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Turn it over to
Lots,
Pam.
I mean, we could spend the next week just having this conversation, and I apologize, but we do have other things. I mean, I'm gonna call an artificial time
I
and
need
ask,
a point of clarification.
please, a point of clarification, and then I would like a motion on the floor so that we can discuss and take action today. Martha?
Okay, I've just heard that there's a floor, but in these recommendations, I'm not seeing it, so did I miss something?
That was Charles's, I think, initial question, and the response was that it is expected to be part of the implementation work that is going next, because there's data woven into it, and
So we don't have a
you
percentage
do not have a
floor here.
percentage
But
in
could we
this
say in the
report.
recommendations that the next phase of the implementation will sort of look at the creation?
Say
of
it
the
more
floor?
explicitly? Yes, we can say that, I
Perfect.
think, as long, and I would request that whoever makes that motion include that as part of the motion.
Perfect.
Okay, so, council members, do we have a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, so the motion I hear on the floor is to adopt these subcommittee recommendations with the explicit understanding that the implementation work that goes forward will address this issue of a resource allocation. And we are understanding that there's a whole bunch that goes into that in terms of data and other kinds of things too that needs to come forward at the same time.
Can I
So
ask a
this-
quick
So
definition of
Di-
one word?
A discussion, Thomas called you representative, I'm sorry. Commissioner Freeman, Tim.
So in the very last sentence of the recommendation, it says, this includes modifying eligibility requirements for the monies available for the early learning system so that underserved populations are served and prioritized. The word underserved, does that mean people of color, or does that mean people of poverty?
So we've defined the underserved populations in our definition section, and so for our purposes, while the OEIB focused on color, students of color, we've expanded it to race, ethnicity, income status, English proficiency. I mean, it's broad. So if you look at if you look at the definition section, it's on underserved students / population. So it would include all of those groups.
Thank you.
And Madam Chair, I did not make that motion with the change that you mentioned.
I'm sorry, I apologize. So can you clarify your motion, and we'll clarify the second. Rob will come to you. We've got a procedural issue to deal with first, and then we'll come back to you. Okay.
Gotta love parliamentary rules.
I just did with the summary of recommendations as printed.
Okay, as printed, and who was the second?
Me,
It was,
second.
and do you agree to that?
Yep.
Okay, I apologize, I inserted it in. Rob? So the motion on the floor is to adopt the recommendations as summarized at the back right before tab 2. I
I'll wait for
apologize.
discussion.
Okay, we are in discussion. Rob and then Eva.
So, underserved population definition, I think as it's been described, would probably be about 64% of children in the state of Oregon. That, the bottom line here is, we have to figure out if we are going to resource children who don't need resource. I mean, that to me, that's the fundamental question. So, as we look at this, and we're trying to make a difference on outcomes for kids in the state, there are some kids who are going to get high outcomes in the state without us being involved. And I don't want to spend any money on those kids.
We
I want to spend money on kids who need it. And I think that we get to 65% of kids, we begin to stretch. And I also think then we don't have enough resource to make the difference that we need for kids who really need it.
So I'm going to ask Megan to clarify. She has information for council members as a point of information about where we spend our resources now.
So, Rob, that's a great point.
Okay.
The thing about the early learning system, since it's not a universally accessed system, we only serve people in poverty. All of our programs have income eligibility requirements, except for one home visiting program where we still predominantly serve people in poverty. So you have to be at the highest income threshold we serve is up to 185% of the federal poverty level. So our issue is that we can't serve enough of the people who need early learning services with the resources that are currently provided to the system. So then how do you target those resources in the most strategic way possible when there's tremendous need? And we don't serve all of the eligible population right now.
Thank you for the
And actually, for clarification, that definition of underserved populations that we use is straight from the Oregon Education Investment Board's equity plan which is what we're following.
Thank you. And then just one more point of information, then we're going to go to Eva, and then we're going to go to Lynn, is that we also, council, have a statutory definition that we are to use for our resource allocation overall. So that we've been given in our statutory charge by the legislature. So just as a backdrop, I think it mirrors what you've got here, but I'd have to go look at it and come back to it. Eva and then Lynn.
May I move to amend the motion to add the floor?
The floor.
That we're doing this as a floor and moving, that's not the right way. I lost it in all the other discussion, but I think it's important.
So we're going to do it, so council members, we're going to be in parliamentary procedure mode for a moment. So Eva has a motion on the floor to amend the motion.
Right, to what you had said.
The original motion was the summary of recommendations. Eva's amendment is it is the original recommendations, but to come forward with a resource allocation recommendation as an explicit part of all of that. Is there a second to Eva's motion?
Second.
Okay, discussion on the motion, Eva's amendment to the motion, not the motion itself, Eva's amendment, which is the addition of the resource allocation piece. Martha?
I'm going to speak in opposition to that because I think that we need to get the report back of what the budgetary issues are and where they're at. And for us to say at this point, this is the floor that we want, or that we want a floor, I don't think is appropriate. I'd rather have the committee come back and tell us what it is that really needs to occur.
Marlene?
The way I understand the motion is that we're not setting a floor, we're just asking the subcommittee to come back to us with a recommendation on, or what their outcome would be on resource allocation specifics. Is that correct?
And I understand that, but I think that's a mistake at this stage.
You're saying it's premature. Okay. Are there other comments about the amendment to the motion?
I'd like to make another comment. The reason why I like looking at resource allocation specifics is because as a school board member for the Medford School District, we've been tasked by the state to start getting specifics on our goals, start getting specifics on how much money, look at how much money you're spending on ESL children, follow the dollars to see if the money is being effective and all of this. And so for us not to start putting specific numbers behind our budgetary system and allocations, I think it's it's very contrary to what the state is asking school districts and communities to do. So, I don't know which is wrong or right, but I'm just trying I'm expecting that the state is dealing with experts and that they're giving us their expert advice as a school board member. And so I would hope that we're doing the same here at the Early Learning Council.
So Tim, did you have a comment, and then we'll go to Lynn?
So what I was going to say is, I would guess right now, if you took a look at the number of dollars being spent, just because of the extra people that are receiving services, or the numbers of people receiving services in the metropolitan areas, I would guess you're already at a pretty high percentage of these dollars go towards the populations we're talking about. So I'd be awful careful trying to either pick a number or set a floor without knowing, what it is you're setting it in reference to. We might already be spending 80% of these dollars on this population. So I would caution in putting a floor in without knowing the data. And maybe I misunderstood what we're doing.
Thank you. Lynn?
So I understand the conundrum. I understand the value of having the committee come back, the subcommittee come back and give us the report. If I would ask the chair and the director of the agency is which is most helpful to getting the job done at this point, because I don't think I know. Is it better for us to hold on adopting this and to go back and do this work and bring it forward next time, or is it easier to tell the subcommittee to bring it back to us in detail after we approve this report? At the end of the day, the dollar amount per the person in need has to have a correlation to driving a result. There's no work that's been done in the last 5 years that says we're gonna spend money just so everyone feels better. And so I do think, in my own experience, in the context of Native American services, we had to specifically advance Native American psychiatry services, spend more per capita than we spent for children in equally serious crises psychiatrically. And we found that we were able to A, do that, B, produce the desired result and move the needle. That's what we're about here. I just have very little interest in doing anything that doesn't produce a different result than what we're currently doing. So I would look to the director to tell us which of these avenues by these motions is most productive in the agency.
I could see it going either way. I'm comfortable with the council directing staff to go back and do the research and then come back with a recommendation on a floor, or we do research and we discover what we bring to you and you guys decide that we don't actually need to establish a floor. I think that is probably the path that we should take today. We're not ready to vote on what a floor would or wouldn't be.
Right.
To me, I feel like to implement the last bullet point here, the last sentence of the last bullet point, is really what we're kind of parsing, and we need more information. So I'm comfortable with it passing with Eva's motion, to have us do that work and come back to you. Because I think that still gives us a lot of flexibility to do the investigation and work that we need to do to actually have data for this council to make decision on whether or not we need a floor or not. I would be really sad to see the recommendations not moved forward, because there's a tremendous amount of work that needs to start to happen. And staff don't feel empowered to start that work until the council tells us that we can. And there are 8 other recommendations here that need work to get started on.
Yep.
Okay, so council members, are we ready to vote on Eva's amendment?
I just have to, for me, my answer would be no. Because it strikes me that what I'm observing is that we are at the point where we have to truly, either we're going to walk the talk or not. And so changing how we do our work is a very hard struggle. And let me just say up front that one of the things that I have to say about the work of this group that has given us this report has been truly walking the talk. In my world, I have to do this all the time. I constantly am looking at, shut up, Harriet, you didn't even do what you're asking other people to do. And that was, whether I showed up or not, I got a phone call. Whether I could come or not, then the web page showed up, and I'm not electronically, then, well, okay, I got to get a connect this way. Someone must have spoken to my boss because she started talking to me. I'd go to places and people said, you know, we missed you at the last meeting. I mean, it was just totally how you include the voice that doesn't get heard. Totally walk the talk. So for me, what they came up with, must have been an outreach to multiples, because at some point it became almost too diffuse. It's sort of like the definition of what's underrepresented, which is now like, okay, how do we then move to prioritizing, bringing to the level of consciousness what the priorities for the next 3 to 5 years will be, given that 60-some% of the population satisfies this definition. And I don't know how we get there, but I kind of don't know that I want to give it back to one person's division based on how I know we got here in the first place. So for me, that would be why I wouldn't vote. It isn't that I'm not in agreement or disagreement with this. It's just that I think that it is the work of this group to figure out what our priorities are or aren't, and then task the folk who do such a wonderful job of making that work happen to make that work happen to align here.
Right, and sort of to follow up on that, it was a recommendation at one point of the committees that there be a floor, and it actually called out a number. I think sort of following sort of Rob and Megan's advice here that we need to do more research and sort of go and look at what the floor could be, what should it look like, what sort of are we currently spending. like that makes a lot of sense to sort of take a methodical route and figure some of that stuff out. But it was a recommendation of the groups that there be a floor, which, you know, so one thing, so there's a proverb that I think so there's a proverb that just keeps ringing in my head. It says, I pointed to the stars and the moon and all you saw is the tip of my finger. And I think right now what's happening is we are perhaps focusing on the fingernail and we're not focusing on the full hand. And the full hand is turning the dial, right? The full hand is us saying that, you know, 5 years, so those of us who've been sort of at this table and been knocking at this thing here, that we've got to move and we've got to do something. The outcomes aren't enough. Like, we can do this, Oregon. Part of what inspires me about the state, not only sort of listen to guys like Dick talk about this stuff with such passion, is the fact that I believe we live in a state that if we do call things out and if we do focus, we do get outcomes. And part of what's disappointing about how long this conversation is going is there seems to be a fear about calling out children of color. And what you're saying to me, as the father of 2 children of color, as the uncle of children of color, is you don't give a damn. So we can keep having the discussion, or we can just make a decision here. Tell me you don't give a damn and you don't want to say that let's go figure out a floor at some point and sort of research, or we can just sort of, you know, continue to do what we've been doing. It's kind of that simple at this point, right? Like, and it won't, you know, I'm a big guy. I'll go home and I'll eat my chicken and I'll be good. But let's just make a decision.
Well, the one good thing about
Can I make another comment?
well,
Yeah, so Tim, just a second, we got a couple people in the queue and then we'll come back to you. So yes, you may.
Thank you.
And then we're gonna vote on this amendment, because council members, in the interest of time, we do need to move into, how are you doing on time, Amy? You okay? All right.
You know, if you and I always agree, then one of us is unnecessary. So,
That's nice.
that's very well. I mean, yeah. So, so while I agree, I'm not certain that it's as much about us not, I think it's an unwillingness to prioritize one group over another versus whether it's people of color or not of color. Because I think that the piece of the poverty is people of color are going to end up at the top anyway, because the system creates people of color being in poverty, being unhealthy, and all because of all the dynamics. But race is probably what hit the room first. So, so I think that the group is struggling. This is just my perspective. Is struggling more with having to bring to a level of consciousness where our 3 to 5 year priority will or won't be, because it could potentially be seen as a non-valuing and a non-respect of that group, whatever group is left out. So for instance, if we were to zero in on Native Americans, then of course I'm going like, well, what's up with that? Is my people like chopped liver or what, or women not? So I think that's a, and because we haven't identified some clear cultural values and norms and whatever, I don't know that we're ready to go there. So I do agree with you, Charles, but in a way I also broadly disagree. And so that's just my takeaway. This is just tough. This is very difficult work, but I think we're up to it.
Great, so in the queue, I had Tim, I had Lynn, and now I have Khalid, and then I'm gonna call the question after that. So council members, get ready. We do have time. We have people needed across the aisle, we are across the street, and we have people on a schedule to get to communities to have this very conversation. So we do need to move. And then, so it's Tim, it's Lynn, and it's Khalid, and then we're gonna vote on the amendment to the motion. Tim.
So thank you. I'll try to be brief. So the passion that was heard a few minutes ago was really exciting for me. My wife, who was the first generation in her family that was, their first language was English, grew up in very rural Oregon in a time when racism was very, very prominent. And even as recently as my daughter's 23, faced some racism problems as she went through school. So I share that passion. My challenge around a floor is that I don't want to do a token floor. I mean, I could from having funded these budgets and understand where we're at in this, I could say, yeah, let's do 50%, knowing that it's likely way under what the current funding amount is. So if that makes somebody feel good, fine. I would rather take the time to figure out what we're doing now and make sure whatever floor we set is at no lower place than what we're currently doing. I don't want to step backwards.
So Tim, I think we're in agreement here, brother. So we're in agreement.
I don't want to back up.
So we're in agreement. What we're all saying, or at least what you and I are saying, is that we don't necessarily want to define the floor right now. We want to say that there should be a floor, and we trust that staff can go and work with the committee to figure out what the floor should be.
And bring it.
All right.
And then bring it back.
So I'm going to call on Lynn, I'm going to call on Kali, and then we're going to call the question. I'm sorry, I'm going to put on turbo chair hat, and we're going to start, we need to move, all right? We have people that are needed across the street.
So the floor is, that what Eva's motion is about is holding up on this report and going back and doing that work. Is that correct?
No. It's adopting the report, adding a recommendation that there be the creation of, that the implementation group look at the creation of a floor, a funding floor, research what the floor should be, come back and suggest what the floor should be based on sort of our current funding of organizations, so on and so forth.
So,
And just for clarification, there is, in this report, there is no floor, there's no limit on funding. It
Right.
just says, it actually uses the term prioritizing.
Right.
Prioritizing underserved populations in budgetary
Right.
and allocated.
so if there,
Please.
could there be a floor with a outcome requirement? Because a floor to funding is nothing if that funding produces
Yes,
no outcome.
absolutely, yeah.
Absolutely, and I
Need to do.
Okay,
lastly,
so,
this report actually supports effective services, so it's looking for outcome specifics, and only, and prioritizing funding when it is effective, to children of color, whoever it is. that is
so
receiving
I'm gonna
services.
support Eva's amendment with an outcome requirement, explicit. And that's beyond effective. Outcome is results, it means those bar charts in here change.
So I'm going to ask Eva and Charles if they would accept that friendly amendment to the amendment.
Done.
Yes? Okay. So, council members, just to be clear, what we're now talking about is an amendment to the motion that says we accept these recommendations and we move them forward with the explicit understanding that we will have a recommendation before us at some point yet to be determined about funding resource allocation and the possibility of a floor with an explicit requirement that is coupled with outcome, or require for delivery of outcome. Kali?
The question, I think I'm clear.
I'll repeat it one more time, because we've got lots of things going on. All right. Marlene, did you have one more?
Nope.
All right. So we are going to call, council members, what we are now voting on is the amendment to the motion. The amendment to the motion says we accept the recommendations of this report and we explicitly ask for a recommendation before us at some point about the allocation of resources with an to children of color with an explicit requirement for delivery of outcomes associated with those resources. Is there a question?
Madam Chair, yeah, I did not hear color in that. I heard underserved populations. That's what I heard.
I
in the
apologize.
original
I keep
amendment.
putting stuff in there that just doesn't belong.
You're gonna get another hour of this.
Yeah, I am. All right. Underserved, Eva, clarify that it's underserved. I apologize. That is my mistake. The clarification is underserved. Okay?
Did you say you were gonna go for that?
I was actually gonna go for the people of color one, I like that one.
No.
Because it figured out who the, you don't
All
need
right,
to put the
so
spray.
it was my mistake, I'm sorry. One more time. The is this, Eva, tell me if I'm wrong this time. It is the recommendation, or the amendment is to accept these recommendations from the report with the explicit ask for a recommendation on resource allocation for underserved populations with a requirement for outcomes coupled with that resource allocation. So we're gonna vote on this, I'm sorry, we're gonna move this. We're gonna move it one way or the other, but we're gonna move. All right, so that is the amendment to the recommendation. Those in favor If we need to, we're gonna do show of hands, but I'm gonna ask for a voice vote to start. Those in favor of that amendment to the recommendations, it's an explicit resource all these recommendations, an explicit resource allocation for underserved populations coupled with a requirement for outcomes. If you're in favor of that amendment, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Opposed.
Okay. So, opposed, I'm just gonna ask for the
abstention.
Oh, and, I'm sorry, abstentions. Harriet is an abstention?
And I'm an
And
abstention.
Bobby is an abstention. So I am gonna ask for a show of hands, so that I can count and we can determine whether we have support. So if you're in support of this amendment, please raise your hand. Opposed? I'm sorry.
And Tim is also.
And Tim, are you opposed?
I'm a no, yes.
Okay.
Oh, yes.
A no, yes?
I'm a no, yes.
You're a no, yes.
I'm a no, correct.
And the abstentions, I'm sorry? We had 2 abstentions?
Three.
Oh, 3 abstentions, excuse me. So councilmember, the motion's passed. Okay, so we have accepted the report of the committee with an explicit recommendation that will come back to us on resource allocation for underserved populations tied to outcomes.
And I think people should eat, just for their general.
We need to vote. We need to vote on the whole.
Council members, before you disappear, we haven't dealt with the original motion on the table.
Right, you gotta vote on the motion.
So if you could please make your way back to your table.
I'll pass out lunch, how about that?
That's good.
Right. But
Staff is gonna be passing out lunches. We need to vote on the motion. So the original motion on the table, council members, was to accept the recommendations. Council members? We need to deal with the motion on the table. We just dealt with the amendment. So the motion on the table was to accept the recommendation of the committee as written and presented today and summarized on the last page before tab number 2.
With the amendment, we vote no on this.
Yes, with the amendment. The amendment has passed, now we're gonna,
I thought the vote would be yes on the recommendations as amended, because we've just amended it to include that.
That's what I thought, too.
That's what I thought as well.
we still need to deal with it, we still have a motion on the table.
Yeah.
All right, so we need to do something with the motion on the table, which, just procedurally, if we have adopted already the recommendations with the addition, so procedurally, council members, we need to not accept the original motion. So, there's a motion on the table to accept the recommendations as written.
I just got confused. We voted on an amendment to the original motion. We accepted the amendment. Now we vote on accepting the original motion as amended.
Yes, that's right. We vote on accepting the original motion as amended. Is there clear, do we got that?
Yeah.
We are voting on the original, so what we did is we amended the emotions too. We amended the motion, right, to include the explicit recommendation related to resource allocation. Now we're accepting the motion, which is the acceptance of the report, okay? Council members, all those in favor of the motion to accept the committee's recommendations as amended signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed?
Aye.
Any abstentions? Thank you. Motion passes. Now, we're going to take about a 5-minute break for lunch, and then we're going to plow through because we have people on a time certain table. What we're gonna do instead is she's gonna give us a little bit of a primer, and we'll have the communication strategy back on for a conversation and some direction at our May meeting, which is our next meeting. So in the interim, you're gonna just get a little bit of a taste. And I am one of the people who has to run across and testify, and then I will be back. So I'm gonna hand the gavel to Dick, and I will see you back shortly. So we're going to, in order, we're gonna do the communication strategy. Martha will ask, wherever Martha went, we'll ask Martha to do her recommendation, the director's report, and hopefully I'll show up close to that time. So the gavel is yours.
Great.
You want me to
Okay,
lunch?
you bet.
Okay, go for it. So Amy planned this presentation, but asked me to do a little bit of framing up, which I'm going to do very briefly. I think that communications, internal communications, external communications, council communications, has all been pretty challenging for a while because we haven't had a person who's been on point for it or a clear strategy. We now have a person who's on point for it, Amy Craig, who's our public affairs director, who's here to share her best thinking, our best thinking so far around a communications strategy. This was planned to be a longer conversation, what it's going to be today, because she's actually facilitating a community feedback session down in Medford later today, is just a taste for you all on our thinking around communications, and then toss it around in your heads because we'll come back in May and want to talk with you a lot more about it at the next meeting. So Amy, take it away, and thank you.
And I think it's fun to follow Sarita because Sarita and I started on the same day, about 7.5 months
6 months ago.
Yeah.
Wow.
Okay, so we're just gonna do a quick overview of some high-level thinking, and then really want this to be more of a conversation and get the council engaged in whatever way you want to be engaged. But just to start, communications, as Megan said, is integral to everything we do. So communications and engagement should lead up to all of the early learning goals, the 3 early learning goals that you all know by heart. When we get into how communication supports that, this pyramid that you see on the screen here is sort of some high-level thinking about what those strategies look like. And this is really informed by what audience needs and values are in this work and what we expect them to do as an early learning system. So if we had more time, we'd go deep into that. But just to give you a summary view, the bottom of the pyramid is really clarifying and articulating our role and value. So especially in times of significant change, as we are in now, confusion can really be the enemy of progress. So if we can't clearly describe what it is we're doing and the impact we're making, it's really hard to create advocates and move the work forward. So that's sort of the foundational piece there, and that includes clarifying our role and value to the legislature and the work of really learning to the legislature. The next level up, and really follows nicely on the Equity Subcommittee report, is really engaging communities as partners and leveraging wisdom and assets that exist in the communities. So while we are super deeply engaged in this work, there are many people in many communities who care deeply about this and have been doing work with children and families for their whole lives. And so we have to elevate and recognize their role in this work and create more consistent and systemic two-way channels to hear from them and for them to hear from us. And then the top of the pyramid there is really supporting children and families to succeed, which ties to the goals, but that's around how do we create community will to do this work? How do we make sure that we're connecting families to services in a really authentic, meaningful way? So there you are. The audiences here is just to show, we have a tremendous amount of staff, we have a tremendous amount of partners, and we have folks who are out in the community already doing this work, and we have to make sure they're the best advocates they can be. Going back to that bottom of the pyramid, how do we clarify our role and value to make sure that as we're pushing out messages, everyone is aligned around the same points. So these next slides, which you have before you go into specific audience needs, tactics, outputs, but we'll skip through them and just go into so what's been done so far around these aspects. So the bottom of the pyramid, again, clarifying and articulating role and value. We've gone through the process of just getting a consistent style for the division. So when the Office of Child Care came into, and the Early Learning Division was created, there wasn't a style guide, there wasn't a look and feel. And it's a simple thing, but it's a thing that gives people sort of ownership and belonging to an organization, which is really important for treating people as empowered messengers around the work. So we've created a style guide for the division. We've clearly articulated a mission and values, which we've shared out with staff. And then we've been really focused on how do we make sure our materials and messages are audience specific. So making our website really accessible, which has a long way to go. We're in the process of a website redesign. Making sure messages and materials related to the kindergarten assessment are really accessible and speak to people's values and beliefs around that work. And then really elevating outcomes and telling stories. So we have a newsletter plan to get more communications out there to our partners and to a broader community. So that's the clarify and articulate role and value. On the engaging partners and leveraging community assets, we really want to systematize the two-way communications channels, which is why we've hired an engagement coordinator, Annie, who's in the back of the room. Like Sarita, she'll be the lead on this work, but engagement should be integrated throughout the division. So Annie will be helping us to do that, making sure we're providing regular, timely information to folks and capturing stories of success. And then at the top of the pyramid there, again, supporting children and families to succeed. We have organized a public access advisory committee made up of internal folks, early learning hubs, and community-based organizations to have a conversation about what public access to early learning services and supports looks like. And it's right now landing in a 3-tier strategy around how do we create community will, which is a lot of what Dick focuses on. How do we get those community leaders to be speaking about this work and elevating this work? And then how do we make sure supports and services are really trauma-informed and the messages we're putting out are really family-centric and elevate the dignity of families and their role in serving children. And then the last piece of that work is really around how do we support families where they are with what they have, and that's utilizing tools like the Storytime campaign and the Room campaign. And there are lots of materials out there that community-based organizations and others already utilize that we as the state can help elevate and get further access to. So that was a really quick overview. Yeah.
Lynn?
So thank you, and I'm really excited about this work, and I'm really happy to support it in any way I can. I think it's really important because our culture our global culture is converting from one of telling the story to telling the data and sharing the outcomes of the data. And where this discussion began 5 or 6 years ago is the fact that 108,000 kids in Oregon need an intervention or they will fail to enter the workforce, and Oregon will fail to produce a sustainable economy with Oregonians. They will all need to be imported because of the low level of performance. And so I think we need to adopt in these things a intentional, focused goal, communication goal of converting the discussion to data and outcomes. That is how we will get to the issue of overrepresented populations and how we're able to improve their results. But we should not act like it's just something people will do if we don't walk them there and hold them there. It is really hard work.
That's a really important piece, Lynn, and I think it's really audience specific. So I think you're right that there is a hunger for data and charts and outcomes, and it doesn't necessarily resonate with families. And so we sort of have to have a multi-tiered strategy that we can have messages that resonate with community leaders and those folks we need to raise their voices in support of this work and want to be supported by data, and make sure that when we're talking to families, we're recognizing what their needs and values are, and it might not be around the same sort of level of data. Yeah.
Amy, maybe a new twist, a little different twist to what Lynn just said is I would look at it as a quasi-public-private adventure. And there's a lot of great groups out there, but I just happen to be involved with the relief nurseries, and their success has been because they're quasi-public-private, and they've done a great job in their own individual communities of stirring up the private sector to support them. So, and the reason is that win-win of the changing lives of at-risk children, as well as the return on investment, which is super significant. So that voice needs to be stayed out there. And then there's a challenge then that the public just doesn't get to sit on the sidelines. That's my challenge is that, people have to we need the whole community asset group to get off their asset group and to get engaged, and to do that is not I'm on my little soapbox here, but not as a public entity talking down, but encouraging with the data that you have. And Lynn's done a great job on her previous life of doing that and getting help and stuff. So I just encourage that, Martha. You have also. Any other comments from? Yes.
I just wanted to reinforce that as well. The question I get asked the most is around metrics and outcomes. So not just outcomes, but what is the process to measure things along the way? So I wanted to echo that, particularly with leaders, particularly with hubs and things of that nature. People want to understand what does progress look like? How are we measuring it? What are the outcomes that we're driving towards? And I don't have a lot of talking points there. So the more we get that, I think the better off we'll be.
Yeah, that's helpful, Carly. Thank you. Yep. So really helping inform how we talk about the vision and how we measure our progress towards that vision. Yeah, thank you.
So that was the last 6 months of Amy's life in 9 minutes. And we think that it's incredibly important that the way that we're building our communication strategy engages this body as the leaders of our statewide early learning system. And so I would like to invite Amy back in May to have more of a discussion than we're able to right now. But it would be helpful to hear from you all. She's put together a wonderful deck that walks through what the strategy is. What would a conversation in May that would really engage you in thinking about our communications work look like? If we're going to bring her back, where do you want us to focus?
What we're gonna do, when, for whom, how.
So a very specific strategy, yeah, detailed plan. Mm-hmm.
So I worry about it more at the hub level than at the state level, but I think it's equally true. I think, if we had the money to hire a survey firm, they'd find out the communities didn't know we exist.
Very good point.
And so I guess I just have a really basic question that I'd like us to talk about in May is what would change that?
And for what purpose would we want to change that? I think is the important side of that question.
The whole strategy depends on people changing their behavior because we're not going to change the outcomes for all kids with the little bits of money we have. And so either people really change and take ownership for the children in their community or we're not going to succeed. So I feel like this is very central. This is to what we're trying to do. And I have zero skills in it, so I don't even know what questions to ask. But that's the heart of the question is what could we do that would really make any dent?
And I'll be able to share in May too the work of this the public access advisory group that we've put together that's talking about that question specifically. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Oh, got you in the queue here. Rolled right over you, Martha.
Sorry,
okay.
do you want to go?
No, go ahead. She can wait.
Yeah, Dick knows me. I'll wait.
I'd like to see,
I'm used to
I have a couple of very specific things. I'd like to see some articulation of how this is supporting the alignment between the K-12 system. So we've talked about early childhood in grade 12 and age 3 to grade 3, but I'd like a lot more specifics around how our efforts are working towards that alignment. I'd also like specifics around what it means for different community groups. There is still, I heard Charles say when I was on the phone, something about there's just distrust from communities. I'm paraphrasing. But I think that's true. And I get asked a lot, how is this different? And what does this mean for the Black community, for the Latino community? And so more specifics around that. What does it mean? How is it different? How is it going to improve outcomes? Getting back to data, so.
Martha?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Very.
I agree with Lynn that I want to see the specifics on what are the wins and what are we going to go for. And I think Bobby has an excellent point on community as well as Khalid on the 0 to 5. I'd like to see specifics as far as what are you proposing? What kind of campaign is this? I mean, to me, this was an overview which gives us the direction that you might want to go. I hear a lot about kindergarten readiness, but what about the front end of this, at the 0 piece? What are we doing all the way through to get them ready? How does it all connect? And show that actually we do really well with the minor resources that we have, but we don't reach enough of the people that we have to hit, and how are we going to do that? And get the buy-in. You get the buy-in from the community, then you get the buy-in with the legislature.
If I could ask you, what's the group you're going to in Medford?
Oh, the Hub has helped organize a community engagement forum around the kindergarten assessment and how it could be more useful in making the connections
And
between
who do you
early
think
learning.
the people will be there that will be there?
So it's going to be bilingual Spanish-English interpretation, and we've invited, the Hub has put out the invite to early learning providers, K-3 educators, and parents.
You know, I mean, I wondered if, whether or not the Chamber of Commerce president would be there, whether or not would Sid DeBoer be there. I would have a champion down there who lives in the community, who invites 5, 6, 7, 10, 15 people who are the champions of the community, who get, the tribal leaders, so to speak, of the community, that can get things done, that they should be there to hear what's going on, and so, whatever.
That's a good
Yes, Lynn?
One other thing that I think we can come back in May and revisit, and it just occurred to me, but for example, the Oregon Health Authority has great metrics on by race, by geographic distribution, by result. And so if we should, part of what perhaps ELC should be doing, ELC, is collaborating with DHS and OHA and going in with the message of here's what it looks like, here's what we need to do, here's how we collectively can get it done, and that may be helpful. And Oregon Health Authority would be happy to collaborate on that because, again, our ability is largely driven by our success is driven by our ability to leverage ancillary systems and huge amounts of money spent in other parts of the state.
And it will save $75,000 to $100,000 if they don't go into OYA per kid.
Which in the long run is cheaper.
Yes, Lynn, I think that would be fabulous. And in fact, probably not everyone has this council's strategic plan memorized the way that I do. But under goal 3, one of our deliverables by December 2015 is actually an MOU between early learning and ODE, OHA, and DHS around what specifically and concretely our work together starts to look like. And I think we were thinking about things like sharing data, which please let us use your data. We need it, and we don't have what we need. But we could include communications in that. And I'm just waiting till there's time for me, you, and Erin to talk about it.
And so just because one of the opportunities is I understand that people love MOUs, and they are something that the tool that the state uses to get people working together. I just want to throw down that we're happy to work with you without an MOU.
Great.
And to start immediately on the level of capacity that we currently have, which is fairly significant given our metrics and our data and so we can start that work with you and are happy to do that. And then we'll develop the MOU after we've got it all done.
After we're already doing
I
it.
got
Yep.
the MOU in my basketball practice.
Dick, I have one more question.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. So I want, can you clarify though really quick, Amy, on the communications strategy, who this is directed at?
Who the strategy is directed at?
Yeah, I mean, I think I heard 2 messages, maybe 3.
Yeah, so this is a comprehensive strategy that has components for internal audiences, partner audiences, providers, advocacy organizations, legislators, and families and communities.
Okay.
So for each of those, there are different strategies that all reach pieces of the pyramid.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate that you're looking at different audiences, and I have to say I hope we can really focus on making this accessible language written at a reading and comprehension level that doesn't require a PhD and or a master's degree. I mean, I think, as someone said earlier, this group of people reads and comprehends at a much higher level. I had mentioned to Marlene and Sarita that even our report on equity, sometimes I had to stop and reread a sentence and so it was for the council and people could get that, but I feel like what we really need to do is make sure that the average Oregonian, which I think I have become, can understand what we're talking about and feel not intimidated by it.
Thank you. That's a big piece of the clarify and articulate role and values,
Yep.
making sure it's audience specific and accessible. I'm sorry.
Amy, yes. Go ahead.
Just to say, can we also have it in all 5 of the top 5 languages spoken in the state?
Yeah, and you'll see I called that out specifically in audience needs to cultural and linguistic accessibility. No, I know, I ran through it really quickly.
I
but
just want
definitely
to note that I would like Amy to drive at a safe speed.
Yeah.
I don't know if
Let her go.
there's a lot of, at least in the Portland Metro, a lot of East African immigrants, and I don't know if they're a top 5 language, but they represent a big population within the Black population, so I want to make sure that they're included, and yeah.
We're not in the top 5, but I would say yes to that too.
Okay, Amy, safe travels.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank
good.
you very much.
You know, the state has an airplane over at the airport that you could use, that no one uses. It's crazy.
Are you serious?
Yeah, the forestry department has it. Okay, we're gonna hear prenatal age 3.
It's a drop water airplane.
Yes, please do. Martha Brooks is gonna talk to us about the prenatal to age 3 subcommittee report. Listen up to this, Charles, this is important stuff.
I'm here.
Okay, man.
Okay, so, were you gonna set the stage?
So we were
Okay.
gonna do this under Pam's director's report, but since she's not here, I'll do my best to fill in. We are in the process of doing a statewide RFA for the Healthy Families Oregon program, basically recompeting that program for the first time in a really long time, or maybe ever. And as part of that, Martha and the program manager for HFO and I started talking about the need to also kind of reestablish the Advisory Committee for Healthy Families Oregon, which is a requirement of the evidence-based program that it is. As we talked about it further, and as we talked about it with Pam, we recognized that it was actually an opportunity to establish a subcommittee of this group that, yes, could advise on issues related to Healthy Families Oregon, but actually could take a broader view and start to actually really approach prenatal through age 3 policy for the council in a more disciplined and thoughtful way, which will help us move our strategic plan goals forward, and is just something that I think a lot of us have felt is a little bit of a gap and potentially getting lost in a lot of the conversation right now. That came up quite a bit at our January meeting. And so as Martha and Aaron, who is our staff member on HFO, were developing their HFO advisory, Pam and I asked if they actually would be willing to look a little bit broader. And Martha said, yes, absolutely. I've been dying for the chance to really open this up. And so what you have in front of you is a proposal for us to establish a prenatal through age 3 advisory group. You'll see the proposed charter, as well as some proposed operating guidelines for the subcommittee. And what we would like to do today is have you discuss whether or not you'd like to have this committee, and if yes, and the council votes in favor, we'll work with Martha to actually get the committee established. So with that, I'll hand it over to you.
So to give you a little bit of background, HFO, Healthy Families Oregon, is the home visiting program under the Early Learning Council through the Department of Education. And I think the only other home visiting program, correct me if I'm wrong, Krista and Megan, is Early Head Start, which is also under Department of Ed. We have been in a holding pattern since the commission was decommissioned and went over under the Early Learning Council under the governor's office, and now we're here. And over that course of time, I've actually been the chair for, I don't know, whatever time that is, 3-4 years. And we held off on the reconfiguration, waiting for things to stabilize and to get established. So right now, I have an advisory committee of about 6 people. We have not added. We didn't know if we needed them approved by the governor. We didn't know if we needed them approved by the Early Learning Council, so it was just easier to wait until the prime time. Now it's the prime time with the RFP going out. It switches and changes the whole dynamics. Some of the people that are sitting on the HFO actually may not be on the HFO under the reconfiguration of the RFP. It is a requirement of Healthy Families America to have an advisory, so we can't do away with it. We need it in order for the accreditation of the state program. So with that, then we did have the conversation of what to do to expand this to get the maximum, as Dick and I like to say, bang for your buck. And so what do? And the decision was made to go to a prenatal to 3 group to expand the membership to include about 15. What else do we need to say? And then we will work through some of the other prenatal issues. One comment that came back to us that I'd like to make a friendly change to is that under the charge, we called out McVie specifically, and to actually strike that and make that more governmental agencies and organizations, make that a broader scope rather than hitting just McVie. McVie may or may not be around. Some other state agency, we can call it out, or subgroup of an agency, but to be broader so that we can include more is probably a better and easier way to go than trying to list 40 different organizations and areas. I think that the 0 or prenatal to 3, and you'll notice that we already have an acronym, P3, is a fairly important place to hit, since we're only hitting about 15% of our kids in any of the home visiting programs across the state. Brain development, 85 to 90% happens in those first 3 years. Our child abuse and neglect rate is 0 to 5, with the majority of that coming in 1-year-old and less. And so if we're not paying attention here, you're not going to have success in your kindergarten, and you're not going to have success in your pre-K. With that, I'm open for some questions, comments.
Any comments? Yes.
Just in terms of Early Head Start, it's true that there is Early Head Start in the state. There's $1 million that is invested through the Department of Education, but those dollars are funded essentially to Head Start programs that are already serving Early Head Start, as you well know. And so I think it would be advisable, and I would recommend it, that be an added seat or representation to represent the federal to local Early Head Start programs to be a part of this, just because so many of the funding strategies that are out there right now are really focusing on making the transition from the 0 to 3 to 3 to 5, and then that 5 to kindergarten, so 0 to 5 or 0 to kinder transition. And so strategies for thinking about that might align with, and so ensuring that there's that representation, whether it happen through an existing seat that you have identified, or it be an addition, I think that might be fine, but a specific call out to it would be a good idea in my opinion.
What we did on membership, Krista, and we had that conversation, do we call them out, do we line them out? The only one we really have to have is HFO because of the requirement there. But the thought process is twofold: to have people from the other programs, such as Early Head Start, but we didn't want to tie that in so tight as well. We want to make sure that we're going out to that broader perspective of outside, making that more of a community-based or advocacy-based, and to get away from the internal agency piece, that we don't want to be represented by all agency people on this advisory, that we want to bring in the outside people.
Oh, I'm in full support of that. I think the fact that so many of the investments around Early Head Start do represent communities and local, that you might be able to find someone on a local Head Start board, Early Head Start board, who could very well represent that community perspective.
Sure. Well, and my vision on this too is also to have some ex officio members who sit on that. 15, I told Pam and Megan both that we were at originally 10, and I said I'm willing to go to 15. Small committees, big committees don't scare me, so if you want to expand it, doesn't matter to me.
Janet, then Bobby.
Sometimes big committees scare me, because then I think people don't feel the same responsibility to show up. That was just a side thought. Does this include public health visiting nurses? Then one other group I feel is sometimes forgotten is early intervention. So children with special needs birth to 3 are served in their homes. And in my experience, a lot of times that has not been recognized by the community at large. And it is a big population of children, so.
Yeah.
And
I
it could be,
definitely-
I mean, again, it wouldn't have to be a provider, but just.
Right. No, I definitely agree.
Or
We
just-
do have 5 flexible seats, so we can,
And just, it wouldn't even have to be a person, just as long as the committee kept that in mind, because we are kind of separated invisibly from ECSE services right now. And to me, they're all little children first.
sure,
So.
sure. Well, and we need to crosswalk between these programs as well as ERDC and some of the rest of it.
Bobby?
I have 2. One, the P3 is already in use in our field as ages 3, preschool through grade 3.
Third grade.
And so I think if it's still possible to change the name, I think this is a problematic language because, and every time it comes up, there's a typical conversation. Are we talking prenatal or are we talking preschool? And it just feels like we'd be confounding it if we took this name. And so,
Okay.
Maybe we
Let-
just avoid the acronym.
Yeah, let me clarify. Bobby, we're not calling it pre to 3. The group is called prenatal to age 3. It's just,
well, it's going to get shortened to P3.
Okay.
Whether you did it or not,
Yeah.
people are going to shorten it, and that term already has a meaning.
Yeah, and I get that. I'll push back though, because I don't think we should call it 0 to age 3, because we really need to be looking at the prenatal side. So if you can figure out something.
Birth, you want
Well,
to do
birth
prenatal,
doesn't-
you want to do
birth.
prenatal.
Yeah.
So try and think of a word that,
Yeah, if you have a suggestion.
okay, great.
We can
But
try
I
to
just see this as
incorporate
unnecessary confounding. Anyway, the second is, I want to follow up more on what Janet said. So, this is going to be a work group or committee. We need to figure out whether we're work groups or committees, I guess, anyway, of this council and report to us. But some of the home visiting programs answer to OHA through public health and to the public health division. I'm just wondering if we can't think through before we move too far, how we don't exacerbate what's already, some confusion.
Write that down.
Yeah, I don't know if confusion's the right word, but some divisions in groups that are really doing the same thing. And we've got these efforts in the state level to think together, and, the data work that group did under OHA to get them all on shared data systems and that kind of work. And is there any way that we can think outside the box and not create a policy group here with another policy group within OHA and have some kind of joint or something like that? Anyway, that's my concern.
Do you want to answer that question, or are we?
Sure. So I think that's a really well-made point, Bobby, and it's one that we wrestled with a little bit in this proposal and talked about with Pam as well. So we do still have the joint ELC OHPB subcommittee where that shared work happens, and we would like to see people from healthcare and from human services serve on this one as well. It felt like there was a need for this council to have a space where issues related to prenatal through age 3 were being discussed. And I think that there's the existing shared governance structure between ELC and the Oregon Health Policy Board, where just like issues will filter up to this council, we can filter it up to that board as well. I would welcome pushback on that thinking or any different ways to make sure that by creating this committee, we're not creating yet another committee that's a silo. I feel personally, though, like it's important that we have a standing committee of this council that's focusing in on these issues and being inclusive of our colleagues in public health at OHA and at DHS. So I don't know how to balance
Well, I mean,
but
I think it's needed.
Yeah.
So that isn't my question. It's in how we create it. Could we think outside the box and somehow make it intrinsically cross agencies instead of just bringing other agencies on in the hope that we will have that perspective?
Yeah.
Chrissy?
Well, so that just makes me think about, in the lines of coordination, there's also the Home Visiting Steering Committee that is specifically related to McVie, but they are very cross-sector in their scope as well and have done systems work around data and other things. So was there any thought to how some of those other committees who take this on might potentially link into something like this? Or was there more conversation about how this might perhaps be a link or a placeholder for future connections?
Yeah, that one as a placeholder and a link for future connections. And then also, as we're thinking about membership, Martha, if I'm overstepping, feel free. But as we're thinking about membership, we'd really like to focus on this committee being made up of folks that don't work for the state government and to really focus on bringing in that outside perspective.
And the steering committee with McVie, being very familiar with McVie and the steering committee, is primarily state agency people. And I don't think that they're working necessarily on policy work that we're going to be dealing with across the street or back in Washington, D.C.
Lynn has an idea.
So I'm going to have to excuse myself to get to another meeting, but I would suggest that one of the things that would be great and would fit well with how the Health Policy Board functions, and I agree with getting other people on it and not just having it be, inside baseball, is to make it a task force and give them a task and tell them to come back and do it by a deadline and adjourn it. Because I think there's an energy level that's hard to sustain with, and it certainly is hard for this organization with our meeting schedule to just have kind of ongoing standing committees.
But isn't it a requirement?
That's a requirement, Lynn. I don't have an option on
Okay.
HFO.
So even if it's a requirement, I would stand it up, but then give it a task and tell it to go do it and come back and not even set regular meetings to kind of enforce that culture. Sorry.
I can't do that either.
You have to have regular meetings. Okay, so I think we do that to comply with the law. There's a way to structure it for results, though, and that's to outline, we want you to get these 3 things done by this much time, and by the time you get that done, come back for another round.
But I think one of the benefits could be, and one of our goals back when it was going to be early childhood utopia, was that every family would not have multiple home visitors.
Right.
And
That's
so
right.
if part of the committee's focus was to help so that we didn't have, there were turf wars. I mean, you have to know that. No,
Stole my
public,
child.
you stole my child. I have said those words
Frankly,
myself.
it still sometimes happens.
So I think that could be a very significant ongoing focus, is to help people be co-trained or something, so that a person, you didn't have to have an early interventionist, an early Head Start person, and a visiting nurse, home visiting nurse.
Harriet? Yeah.
Well, whether you have to have the group or not have a group that's not what I'm focused on, but it may sound like that. I think that for me, it's the charge that the group has, no matter who's on it. And I think that one of the things that I think that some of this restructuring that's going on across the state with all these various committees that have popped up and how we do it business, is that I thought there was supposed to be a link between populations that, so as they feed through the system all the way up through entering the world of life, age 20 or whatever that age was. And so I'm always going to be pushing, no matter what it is, that the charge has to be how you link from whatever you are to whatever comes next. And that's kind of what's missing for me here and that's kind of, I think, one of the things that's been missing across the state. So I would hope that if you're creating a new group, that definite link of 0 to 3, linking to 3 to 5 groups or organizations or community-based organizations and then helping them link to the K-12 system has to be a thread that is there, because it's that we don't have that cross-pollination, the talking, and so we end up in those silos just by default because we never link. So I would like to see that in the charge. I think
Harriet,
some of
that's prenatal to carbine.
Is that what it is? I didn't know what it was, but whatever it is, it's just kind of like,
Good, huh?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Wait.
And let me address that really quickly. I would agree with that. We could probably bump that up in the charge. I mean, there is the link. I mean, it's, if you don't start out at 0 right, you're not gonna get to 3 right, you're not gonna get to 4 right, you're not gonna get to 5 right, and you're certainly not gonna get to graduation right.
Yes, and I think we have a lot of people who are very passionate and doing very good work, but what happens is the drop-off. When the transition happens, this is what we found with our Head Start, which is a little bit different than other Head Starts, is that even though they're part of our pre-K-12 system, that when they transition out of our own Portland Public School Head Start program, our transitions into K, we need to improve. And that's kind of the spirit of what I'm saying, is that we need to improve in that area, all of us.
Right. Okay.
Wait 1 second. Okay.
Yeah, I just, there's some language here that I would change, and I could talk to you outside of it.
Okay.
I just wanted to call it out. One in particular that I think is important for us, as we just had this conversation about equity. The phrase minority populations, when in some places throughout the state, the supposed minority is the majority, is just not accurate. And so I think if the references to communities of color, it should say that and not minorities. So that's one thing. The other thing is, I think it was Janet that made a very good point about just people who do home-based care and family, friends, and neighbor care, and I think that has to be represented in the group. What's challenging is these kinds of committees take place when they're working, and so I don't know how to mitigate that challenge, but I think the voice is absent, and it's absolutely necessary, and because there are a lot of children that are in those child care settings. So I don't know, if I can be helpful, I will be, but I don't.
We, I think, had plans on making you active in that, so just so you know.
Well,
Krista, I put myself in the queue after that.
Just in following up, to the home visiting question, out of that home visiting steering committee, you remember the design group that got together and there was a design team that did all of this work around figuring out how could we make sure that when home visitors were going out, that we created systems that would support families and help them get to the right place. And it's unfortunate because on some level, some of that amazing work never kind of got to the place where it needed to get.
Right.
And so I think that example serves very well the need for having this kind of a committee, and that it be very connected to that, but that also in that work there also is a connection to some of the other work, so you're not necessarily starting from scratch, right? I mean, there's already a lot of good stuff that's been done out there, and maybe connecting it to the council and to the division through the council's purview would assist in really revisiting some of those strategies and thinking about how they might be implemented with more meaning and intention. And so I just, again, a commendation of the idea of focusing on this. And again, echoing Harriet's notion about transitions and thinking about that and ensuring that somehow the local representation for Early Head Start gets involved in that. Because there are two models in that now, right? Home visiting, combined model, and center-based.
Right.
So you have a real continuum of support being extended in that way. So.
Yeah, and I'd agree, there's work that, for whatever reason, has been put on a shelf, and, I'm willing to take it off the shelf.
Let's go.
Martha, this group had the opportunity when we were at the Dalles last, actually in May, I believe it was, Dr. Thornburg, maybe you've heard his 1,000 days just of the female conception, birth, and the health of the host, all the, up to, 720 more days after that, affects the third grade person. And just that alone, so be sure to have that, and that would be a good, to get somebody from up on the hill up there to maybe be part of your group or something, because he's really aggressive on that, and he has the data, the ROI on good health of the female alone. Of course, we want to include the child too. Okay, so Megan, I guess that's, Martha, I got anything else? I think we're done. Come up here and behave yourself, so.
I can, so do we
We just
do a
need to,
motion
need
on
to
this?
we need a motion and.
Oh,
the
need a
council
motion,
wants to
okay.
establish
I
the
can come
committee.
back.
No, that's what was fish, okay. Have a hear a motion on to move forward with the prenatal to age 3 subcommittee. Okay, Kim's moved, second? Second? It's been moved and seconded to move forward with the subcommittee, which will actually be Healthy Families and Oregon Advisory Committee. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Discussion.
Oh.
Discussion.
Sorry.
Dang it.
No more coffee for you.
Actually, probably haven't had enough. It would be really helpful if at some point we could hear back about how the membership structure is being brought together, and also to Kelly's point, to just be able to understand what language has been adjusted or changed. So maybe even if it were a supplemental in our packet next time about what the additions or whatever, however those changes have been made, I would be very interested.
Okay. You note that, Megan? Have that, do that?
We'll get Aaron right on it.
Okay. Any other further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And moved and seconded and passed. Thank you very much. Okay, Megan, you gonna have your report now then?
I do. I have my director's report. So
Okay,
just to
great.
put a period at the end of that sentence, what we'll do in May is bring back a revised charter based on the feedback, as well as recommendations for who should be on the committee, very much like we did with the child care work group, where the council established it, then Bobby came up with who would serve on it, and we brought it back to this group for discussion and approval. One thing to note, one thing I've observed in my 6 months in this role is that we are a little bit ad hoc in our processes like this as a council. One thing that I am hoping to work on with the executive committee and then bring forward to this group in May if it's ready, or July if we need more time, is actually just writing down all of the ways that we manage things like approving a charter and who serves on a committee, so that folks have more clarity as we're becoming more mature in our work together. That was not part of my director's report, but just something I felt like I wanted to say. So I have 4 things in my report today, and one is actually an action item, so we're going to start with that. We need to, it's under tab 3 in your packet. There's a very minor change to the rule, wording change to the rules that you all adopted last time that I need to talk to you about. It's the kind of thing that previously staff would have just adjusted and moved on, but I feel like this council takes its role around rulemaking quite seriously, and I didn't want to just do a staff adjustment and move on. I wanted to make sure you guys knew we were doing that. Second, I have an ask of you that I'm going to talk about to help evaluate our work as an early learning division and supporting you as a council. And then third, want to talk with you a little bit just about how things are going at the legislature, and let you know about an upcoming opportunity to interact with your legislators in district. But let's start with the least fun one, which is the action item. So under tab 3 in your notebook, you'll see the board action summary here. Basically what happened is last time you all approved our registered family rules. As we went into implementation, there was one sentence that was causing folks some confusion. And we want to just delete the end of the sentence. So we would like your permission to amend the rules to say, hang on, Eve, I want to talk about all the way through what it is. So the language as adopted on January 19th says a provider must keep a copy of the Office of Child Care's confirmation letter for all adults enrolled in the CBR that may have contact with child care children. That last part of the sentence was causing confusion in implementation. So we want to just delete it so that the rule would say, must keep a copy of the Office of Child Care's confirmation letter for individuals enrolled in the Central Background Registry. That's what CBR means. You can see here the background and why we're asking to change it. The reason we're asking to change it is that it's confusing people. So with that, I'm happy to take Eva's question and hope that I know the answer. I don't always, but.
Yes, go ahead.
this is just like clarification for like the context, because, well, I think that, yeah, that the way it is currently might cause some confusion about who they should, I'm almost afraid that somebody might get nitpicky and say, well, this is just as confusing because you are just saying a provider must keep a copy of OCC's confirmation letter for the individuals enrolled in the CBR. Does that mean just in their household? So, and is there context in the paragraph that would give that? I mean, that would give that, just so that they don't, somebody doesn't say, well, why don't you have so-and-so's?
Yeah.
The house down the street.
Just like
Yeah,
any random
I mean-
person.
Okay,
Yeah,
I
so
just wanted
yeah.
to know what you were worried about.
Yeah, just so that it, and I don't think that that would happen, but weirder things have.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question, and the reason that we want to make this change is because we got feedback from providers that it was
Okay.
confusing, and so
That's good to know.
so this is a point of clarification for providers, and the last paragraph in the background section explains that pretty well, I think.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that everything else in the
It hangs together in context.
Yeah, like because I know that that wasn't a sentence all alone in the rules.
Right.
It was with a paragraph.
So yeah, it's for people associated with that child care facility.
We need a motion to,
Could I just ask one more question though?
Yes.
So the second paragraph in the background still is a standard, whether you take that last part out, is that right? Because I think that's what the concern was, that anyone residing in the child care or visiting on a regular basis, submitting for or assisting the provider must be enrolled. In other words, by lifting out that last piece, we're still, that second paragraph under background is still in play. Because I think
That's
that,
correct.
the reason, okay, as
Yeah.
long as that's fine, because I think the issue is probably around people that come and go who may not be the kind of people that we want to have in contact with little people.
That's correct.
Okay, got it. I'm good then.
okay, do we need a motion then?
Yes,
Okay,
'cause
we
we're
need-
moving
okay, we
it
need a
forward.
motion to, for the recommendation by the directors to change approve a minor language change in registered family child care rules.
So moved.
Okay, second?
Second.
Discussion? Kristen, now this is your, this is.
Good on this one.
You're good on this, good.
Thank you.
Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So moved.
Okay.
Okay?
The second part of my report is actually an ask for this council to help hold me and the rest of the early learning division accountable. So one of the things that I observed when I was stepping into this role is that at the division level, although the division had existed on paper since July 1st, 2013, we really were still operating and still are to a certain degree, although we've made some progress, as a collection of programs that used to exist in other places that were hanging out together now under the auspice of the early learning division. And so one thing that I and my leadership team and our program leaders have been working to do is to actually figure out what are the functions of the early learning division that are consistent regardless of which program you run, and what does it actually mean to be an early learning division that is together. And we're almost done with doing that work, basically mapping out the fundamental operating processes and supporting processes of our organization. And as we're doing that work, for each operating process, we're defining accountability metrics. And there is one, and when we've defined 6 operating processes and 7 supporting processes, and I'm an organization building nerd, so I could talk about it all day. I won't bore you with what they all are, but one supporting process is leading the agency. I'm the owner of that one, and you are customers of that sub-process. And so starting in April, we're going to ask you to complete quarterly a brief evaluation of how the early learning division is doing in terms of meeting your needs as the policy leaders for the early learning system in our state. So I'm letting you know this now in March so that when you get the survey in April, you fill it out. And then I'll report back, here's how you guys said we were doing in terms of meeting your needs. And then we'll be working to, if it's red, we'll be working to move it to yellow. If it's yellow, we'll be working to move it to green. If it's green, we'll be working to keep it there. But this is just a heads up to look for that and to please respond to it when you get it, because performance on that measure and all the other things that we're starting to measure is really going to drive how I am managing and leading the division. So we'll have an actual performance dashboard
and we'll be doing quarterly performance reviews. And this is one of the measures, and it's one of the ones that I am personally accountable to. So it's just a heads up that that work is happening, and we want you to be part of evaluating our success. Are there any questions about that? I know it's kind of in the weeds, but Eva?
As customers, do we also ask, like, the people that we may represent, like, go out and say, like, is this something that we ask other people to help us fill out the survey?
That's a great question. So there actually are 23 measures that we have that that are survey-based and have to do with customers we interact with. There's one that's specific for parents, for providers, et cetera. So that will be going out to them. The one that will come to you is going to be really specific around how does the Early Learning Division and its leadership meet your needs as an Early Learning Council member. So you should answer it for yourself, but do know that there are customer satisfaction surveys that will go out to anybody who's a customer of our work.
How do you determine the customer of your work and how they receive the survey then?
Even to be honest, we're still working on like designing the surveys and getting ready to deploy them, but like childcare providers are a big one are a customer of our work, and they'll be getting a survey to fill out.
Thank you.
The trickiest one's going to be parents. We're going to really have to figure out how we get a representative sample of parents to respond to a survey that lets us know how they're accessing early learning services or not. In my opinion, that's going to be the hardest one.
You may want to look at the hubs. I know that the Montgomery County hub did some survey to get that information, and I imagine other hubs have done the same, so it would make sense not to duplicate and to see what they've done locally.
Very helpful.
Just a quick question. Is it, and I guess it's just kind of just me thinking about this right now, but is it wise to have the department compiling the information if it's about you? If it's about the department? I mean, I'm not for like establishing another committee or anything like that, but I'm just trying to think of this process. And I mean, in thinking about it, you don't have to answer now, but just thinking about public perception, making sure that we're able to demonstrate to the public that there is a neutral party or something looking at that as well, monitoring that.
Well, I would think that the executive committee would see that.
Good.
So that, and then anything comes, that's, the Water Monthly, or more than that, the executive committee has to,
That's a good check.
for these people here, ourselves, not engaged in that month to month, but I look at this like a college board of trustees, the executive committee carries the water, and so it goes from there.
Yeah, and the management system that we're starting to implement is one that a lot of other state agencies have adopted. And so I think it's a good, fair question. We want to get through a couple cycles of doing this and start to build a muscle of any kind of accountability, and then I think you should keep pressing on that question. I am not afraid to have metrics that are in the red and just admit where we're at.
Don't misunderstand. I was not concerned about that either. But just thinking about it kind of out loud. So
good question. I might actually take that back to the consultant we're working with on this too, just to see how other agencies have tackled that. It's a really good question. So that was that. And then the last part of my director's update for you all is just to kind of let you know how things are going over across the street at the legislature, since we're in the middle of legislative season. I hope that people have been following the governor's comments in the Oregonian and the Statesman Journal, because they're quite exciting for early learning. So, we've been in a stage of transition and trying to really discern what the priorities of the new governor are going to be as it relates to education in general and early childhood education specifically. Governor Brown came out very strong last week around early childhood education and her desire to make it a priority, and specifically to make the package of investments that we put together under the last administration a priority for this legislative session. So, we are still working full bore at an increased investment in ERDC, an increased investment in home visiting, the creation of and an investment in a mixed delivery preschool system, an investment in EIECSE, investment and support for the hubs, and then to keep that kindergarten partnership and innovation fund invested in as well. So it's a package that all hangs together, that starts with investing in infants, toddlers, and their stressed out parents, which is how I think about our home visiting investment. an investment in 3, 4, and 5-year-olds for preschool, investing in supports for working families across the continuum, and then those systemic investments that we really need to make, like the hubs and the Kindergarten Partnership and Innovation Fund, to build the connective tissue between. She's supportive of all of it. The challenge is, of course, how do you find resources for everything when the co-chair's budget put out a framework that sort of says we're going to fund the state school fund, and then we have $60 million to do other things with. The governor's been clear that out of that pot of other things, early childhood is the first thing that we're going to look at in that pot. And she's on the record saying she wants to look for more resources than just the 60. So that conversation is going to continue to play itself out all the way until session ends, of course, but I just wanted you to hear that and be encouraged by it. I've also been encouraged over the last 2 months as I've been visiting with legislators around just how much legislative support there is in the building for early learning as well. So Lindsay Capps, who's the new education policy advisor, actually did come to the meeting today at noon, but we were deep in another conversation and he had to leave. So he's available to answer questions from you all as well.
And his name is what?
Lindsay Capps. Thank you. One thing I do want to ask and just encourage you to keep doing if you've been doing it is to spend time with your legislators on the phone, in district, or over across the way if you can, to help us make the case for a strong investment in early childhood. Because even though there's a lot of support, I just don't think they can hear it enough. To that end, March 27th, legislators have the day off from Salem so that they can spend the day in district visiting with constituents and attending community activities. That's a great opportunity to take your legislator out for coffee, invite them to see your early learning program, whatever it is that you feel you can do to contribute to helping develop their understanding of why early childhood education really matters. So if you are interested in doing anything to that end, I and Alyssa are happy to help you get that set up if you need help. You're all seasoned advocates, so you might not, but I just wanted to make sure that you had that date in mind. And that's it for that part of my report. And I would be happy to take questions or hear folks' thoughts on what they've been hearing from legislators. Kali.
I'd like to hear more about the conversation around the hubs. I've heard a lot of questioning around what they are doing and what impact they're having. And I don't know, I guess I'm curious what you're hearing from legislators, because the couple that I've talked to have been sort of skeptical about, not against, but not also for.
Yeah.
And yeah.
I think that's a great question. I think that it's kind of a mix right now. So there are some legislators, particularly legislators who represent areas other than Multnomah County, who are really strongly supportive of the work that the hubs are doing. And I think it might be the case that we're seeing the early learning hubs make more progress faster in places that have a smaller population that they're trying to impact. But I haven't. Yes, Tim.
I just want to get in the queue. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we could have a long conversation about hubs, and I want to be mindful that we have about 5 minutes left. But I think what we're hearing is a mix of support, or I could be supportive, but I want to see more around what they're actually going to do. We have a hearing on the hubs on Thursday at 3 in the Senate Human Services and Early Childhood Committee, where we'll be going into a lot more detail about the progress that they've made so far. What I've been sharing with folks is that it's still a pretty new system. The oldest one is 11 months old, the youngest one is 1 month old, and so there is a real range of impact that they're having right now, but that they are showing promise in terms of people that they're getting to the table, strategies that they're starting to implement, and with the limited amount of funds that they've had, they've actually gone a pretty far way. And I'm happy to get you even more details offline.
Tim?
Thank you. And Megan, I've got a question about a comment you made. Is there legislators outside of Multnomah County?
One or two.
Really what I wanted to say was one thing we can do about building awareness and support from our legislators is use those connections within our hubs. I've not got my hub share hat on right now, but those people that are part of the hubs already have that credibility. Like we have superintendents of schools and business leaders and people as part of our hubs. Make sure you ask the hubs to use that, that credibility that those members have. Our hub director may not have those connections, but collectively, our hub members do have that credibility, and we've asked our hub members to connect with our legislators, and they run into them at a variety of different places. So that's really, in my mind, as much as it's important for each of us as council members to connect with legislators, we really need to get our hubs that are doing this work to explain the importance of it through their membership and that credibility that exists.
That's a great point, and I should give them a little credit. They've been really doing that. The early learning hubs have all been tasked with making regular contact with their legislators, bringing partners to talk to them. We have, I think, close to 100 letters of support that we're going to submit to the Senate committee that's considering the bill to make the hubs permanent on Thursday. So you don't get that many letters of support unless the support is really there, I don't think. And so it's been kind of exciting to watch it unfold this legislative session, where members who are participating with their local early learning hub have really started to own it. And all that we've had to do is ask, like, hey, can you get somebody to write a letter? And you get like 20 coming in from one community.
Who's going to, anyway, do you have a list of testimony, people who are going to testimony?
I do. I don't know if I can do it all.
Is Sue Miller going to be one of them?
Sue is testifying. So I am, and Pam Curtis, and Senator Steiner Hayward and Lindsay Capps are all testifying. And then there's a lot of community people. Sue Miller is one of them. I can't remember everybody off the top of my head.
No, that's good.
Happy to share that list, though.
Sure. Okay, very good. Yes?
Would you like to add me to the list as somebody who has been, kind of skeptical that is coming around?
Sure.
All right.
Yeah, let's talk after.
Okay, can we move on? Okay.
Yeah, there's
Good.
one more thing. And
Okay.
It's very important for you. And
Okay.
Pam was hoping to be back for this one. So I am sad to let folks know that this is Dick's last meeting as a member of the council.
Listen up, Charles.
I'm crying, man. I'm crying.
No, you're crying. You're crying.
I'm sad because I had hoped that I would have even more time to get to work
Yeah.
with you and to learn from you. I know how much you've done for kids in this state that people see, and I know how much
They
you've
don't see.
done for kids in this state that people don't see. And I just want to thank you for your 5 years of service to this council and let you know I'm going to really personally miss you. I know
thanks, kid.
Pam is going to really miss you, and we got you something to say.
Oh,
I'm
cool.
gonna miss them.
Hey, thanks.
So thank you so much.
Thank you very much. That's, I'm going to spend my time with reentry, so it's kind of a.
Not in reentry?
In reentry. Reentry in the. It's kind of interesting. I was complaining to the governor about the reentry commission didn't have any lay people on it. My wife says lame, but didn't have any lay people on it. And so I was whining and whimpered to Kulangoski and then with the Kitzhofer, and then they put me on it. Then Dick Alexander, as you know, represented both ELC. Yeah, actually, it's Dick Alexander who got the rural business community in the state of Oregon involved in early learning. And so when he died, I just jumped all over the governor to be sure that, the best possible way to just get that person that can bridge the two gaps, and unfortunately picked me. And so, but it got to be, Pam, we didn't do our subcommittee reports here, but it got to be just about too much on the OEIB and this, and then being chair of that Incomes and Outcomes Committee was really a lot of work. And the Reentry Commission, I'm under the Department of Corrections Enterprises and the reentry for the state of Oregon and the reentry for Marion County. And I can brag a little bit with the team that we have here in Marion County. Our recidivism is 14.5%, which 30% is the statewide, and that's millions of dollars spent. So anyway, or saved, I should say. So yeah, it's been great. I testified yesterday or day before. I can't remember what day I testified yesterday. I guess it was with Sue Miller on ELC with the House group, and there's the business community is really seeing where the advantage of early learning is very, very return of investment. So anyway, it's been great serving with you. Pam, you're a great chair on this thing, and know most of you guys and gals. I really would encourage you to get another individual who's, doesn't have to be a gray beard necessarily, but a person who's who's business oriented, who can go out to the community and represent what we're all about here. So yeah, it's been a good gig.
You are going to be very missed.
Ah,
There,
yes.
there are no feet that can fill those shoes. So,
Right.
thank you.
Okay, Pam, welcome back. We're on the
All right. Woo!
Yeah.
I just told Megan I have to be back across there 2:45. It is the season. So,
Sure.
we are at subcommittee.
Excuse me, I'm sorry, this
Yep.
didn't acknowledge it.
Subcommittee reports. So, council members, as has been our practice, we acknowledge the subcommittee reports that are in our packets, unless anyone wants to bring one forward. Otherwise, we will just accept them and acknowledge them. So, is there any item from the subcommittee packets that we need to bring forward at this time, council? Okay, thank you. Hearing none, we'll move on to public testimony. And so, Helen.
Thank you. I'm Helen Visaraga with the Center for Intercultural Innovation, and many of you know me, and I have been ringing the bell for equity for most of my life and the last 5 years here in Oregon in the early learning system. I really want to applaud you and thank you for the work you've done on the subcommittee and this report. And also today, as I sat back and observed the activity with Carmen, I really want to keep reinforcing that we have to develop in all governance and leadership organizations value-driven leadership processes. And the values that you bring should be reflective of the values of the communities that are impacted by your decisions. And one of the most wonderful experiences that I've had in the last few months is working with key leaders and organizations around value leadership practices. The other piece that I would like to be able to have you think in the back of your mind as you move into the implementation processes and look at your training and technical assistance system, that you think that out real carefully and not embed a new system on top of the existing TNTA systems that have not been as culturally and equitably planned out. And those are just my comments, and I applaud you for your work.
Thanks, Helen. All right, council members, we are going to take just about 2 minutes to do any closing reflections for today, and then we will talk just a bit about our next meeting and then move forward. So any closing reflections from council members for
I'm gonna
today's
miss Dick.
Yeah. I'm going to miss the show between the two of them. The Laurel and Hardy show.
Yeah.
All I have to say is he invited me to lunch, and now I see he's not even gonna be back. I find that I find that very strange.
Trust a used car salesman.
Okay.
Dick invited you to lunch, there's something going on.
All right, anything else, council members? All right, well, today was, I think, a really good meeting. And I just want to thank everybody for their participation in the conversation that we had this morning as a result of the subcommittee recommendations. Excuse me, I'm sorry. We have clearly a lot of conversations yet to have, but it was a healthy beginning. And so thanks everyone for expressing and participating in that conversation, and lots more yet to come. So our next meeting, I don't have it in front of me because I closed this up, is May which?
Alyssa.
Sorry, May, we don't know. May, it's May, it's in May.
It's scheduled, I just don't remember.
It's toward the end of May, I'm sorry, I don't have at the top, but we keep. Our plan, council members, again, we have been traveling to communities, and in our, kind of our 2-day pattern, but during the legislative session, because of the reasons that we all are aware of, Lynn had to leave, I had to leave, I'm gonna go again here in just a sec. We're gonna be in Salem for our May meeting, and then we'll go back in our July meeting to hitting the road again.
And are we sticking with the 27th date? Was that what you said, Alyssa? 27th?
We had 2 days blocked, so more to come on that. We can expect to hear from staff, but it will be one of those days here in Salem.
27th or 28th.
All right?
Got it.
All right, thank you, everybody. We are adjourned.